I asked my husband for an open marriage, he refused, so I cheated and now I deeply regret it. Tom worked diligently on fresh test data, a monotonous and lengthy task that was crucial to his team's recent efforts on the test car. Despite his lack of enthusiasm, he diligently organized the information for analysis. His phone chimed with a text alert. Glancing at the screen, he momentarily ignored the sender's identity. Only after a lull in his data work did he glance up from his monitor, retrieving his phone to inspect the message. It hailed from an unregistered number, though local in area code, unfamiliar to him. Initially deeming it potential spam, he reconsidered, opting to open it in case it originated from a team member whose contact he hadn't yet saved. Clicking on the message revealed an unexpected sight, a carnally explicit photo. Bewildered, he read the accompanying message. Pay close attention. You still have time. At Bradley's. 18. Ouch. He reviewed the message once more, pausing for a moment. He then let out a slight chuckle. It wasn't common for them to receive misdirected solicitations, and he was about to discard the message when he glanced at the image once more, causing his heart to skip a beat. Initially unnoticed on her left leg, so minuscule it was nearly imperceptible, was a tiny mole belonging to Alice, his wife of 6 years. Staring at her in disbelief, he desperately sought something to refute what he had witnessed firsthand. Yet the more he scrutinized, the more convinced he became that he was indeed beholding a damning photograph of his spouse. Rereading the message, he puzzled over its significance. Bradley's was a local pub, but not one frequented by Alice. He was in the neighboring town, so why Bradley's at 6 in the evening while Alice should have been en route to Boston? Her team was gearing up for a significant proposal. The presentation loomed for Monday afternoon. The entire team had flown in today, slated to convene tomorrow for final proposal touches, and on Sunday for a comprehensive rehearsal before the actual event. As one of the leaders, Alice's presence was essential for preparation. It was currently 5:15 p.m. Her arrival in Boston was scheduled for 4:30. Normally, she'd check in upon landing, but it seemed plausible she was occupied assembling the team and their gear en route to the hotel. He contemplated phoning, but opted to address the message first. Nothing original, but entirely expected. "Who is this and where did you get this photo?" he typed out. "Should I meet you at Bradley's?" Packing his belongings for the day, he resolved to head to Bradley's for answers. He needed to hear from Alice about the flight, so he sent her a casual, "How did the flight go? I'm grabbing a bite. Call me when you're free." He planned to maintain a low profile and unravel the situation. As he strolled to his car, his phone beeped again. Alice, he presumed. Unlocking his phone, but the message came from the mysterious sender. "I'll be there, but I'm sure you'll find someone more interesting than me." His head reeled. Quickly, he launched the Maps app on his phone and hastened to his car. It took him 30 minutes to reach Bradley's, and it was now 5:40 p.m. He would arrive shortly after 6, unaware of the urgency. He planned to head straight there, hoping to make it in time for whoever the sender of the message thought would interest him. En route, his phone rang again. This time it was Alice, mentioning the hectic time with her team. "I'll call you later before bed. Love you." He didn't think much of it. Their conversation could wait. His focus was on the meeting at Bradley's and how the sender obtained such personal information about his wife. His heart raced as he pulled into the parking lot at 6:12 p.m. The sender hadn't hinted at whom he was seeking, so he assumed whoever wanted to meet him knew him and would reach out. However, it was the suggestion of someone more captivating being present that troubled him the most. The message's sender possessed knowledge he lacked, leaving him feeling like he was being manipulated. Yet he couldn't think of another way to unravel the mystery. Inside, he was in turmoil over the photograph. He had complete trust in her, and their bed life seemed satisfying, or so he believed. However, there was only one means for someone to acquire his wife's photo, and he was about to discover it in roughly 5 minutes. The prospect of this revelation filled him with dread. Stepping into the dimly lit pub, he scanned the unfamiliar surroundings, uncertain of its layout. Ahead lay a spacious dining area, while to the left stood a bar. Choosing a seat at the bar's end, he signaled the bartender, who had just finished serving a well-dressed patron, to take his order. He requested a draft and turned his gaze toward the dining room. A man, having placed his order, traversed the floor, heading toward a table occupied by cheerful individuals. And then he spotted what the message had hinted at. Alice sat at the table, graciously accepting a drink from a sharply dressed man, exuding charm in her little black dress and pearls. Meanwhile, Tom operated on autopilot. Approaching the table, he closed the distance to Alice, who, upon spotting him, transformed her open smile into a startled expression. Undeterred, Tom continued his stride, seizing the well-dressed man's hair with his left hand, yanking it back forcefully. The man dropped his drink and stumbled backward, crying out in pain as Tom pulled him past. Releasing his grip, Tom poised for a right punch, only to realize the man had retreated too swiftly, falling onto his rear before Tom could engage. "Don't bother getting up, Pete," Tom cautioned. Pete, now disheveled and drenched in spilled drinks, nodded silently, making no attempt to move or speak. Returning his gaze, Tom observed the table's solemn silence. Recognizing familiar faces, members of Alice's team, who often gathered at their home, he pondered the peculiar loyalty to the team amidst betrayal. Except for one individual, someone present knew the truth and chose to divulge it. Briefly considering uncovering the informant's identity, he swiftly dismissed the idea as unworthy of pursuit. "I'm heading home. If there's any hope of salvaging our marriage, you'll come home now," he declared. Agreeing, she began to rise, but he motioned for her to pause. "Give me a moment to depart," he requested. Before leaving, he directed his attention to Betty Wilson, seated beside Bob Thorin. "Betty, Bill thinks you're in Boston too." "Bob, is this what Hannah believes?" Their avoidance of eye contact and silence spoke volumes. "Is the entire team involved with each other?" he pondered. Regrettably, he knew that at least one of them was. The journey home was mechanical, and he was surprised to find himself in his driveway. Entering the house, he retrieved a beer from the refrigerator and settled into the living room. While familiar with Bill Wilson and Hannah Thorin, he didn't recognize the other two couples among the four present. Debating whether to contact Bob or Hannah, he realized he had little desire to engage in conversation and lacked pertinent information. However, considering Betty and Bob's deceit and the situation's gravity, he opted to send them a message. "Just heard from Alice. The team's travel plans seem to have changed. Best call for updates." Now they were aware of a disruption and could choose whether to delve deeper. At least his conscience was clear. After about 20 minutes, he heard the garage door open, signaling Alice's arrival. Waiting in the living room, he watched as she entered, still clad in her little black dress but minus her shoes and jewelry. Despite her composed demeanor, he sensed her readiness to speak. As she settled onto the sofa opposite him, remaining silent, he believed in the potency of silence in discussions, prepared to let it linger as long as necessary. But it didn't last long. Alice appeared on the verge of bursting. "It's not what you think," she began, only to be halted by his raised hand. "You have no clue what I think about what I witnessed tonight," Tom retorted. "I don't need a lengthy explanation. We're both engineers. We know there's no definitive answer to any question. Why is just a way to rationalize subpar outcomes, so I won't bother asking why. Let's start with something else. How much time, how many people, how frequently? Do our acquaintances know about this apart from those at the table? Am I labeled as your betrayed man among our colleagues and friends?" "No, Tom, it's not like that," Alice countered. "We're a team. Our travel plans got disrupted, and instead of returning home and traveling again tomorrow, Pete suggested we stay in town to rest before the job starts. I didn't see the entire team." Where was everyone else?" "Some decided to stay home an extra night and meet us at the airport tomorrow," she admitted. "But you chose to deceive me," he accused. "You seemed quite close to Pete. Is there something between the star engineer and the prodigy program manager that I should know about?" "Well, for starters, Pete is okay. And he persuaded Bradley's owners not to press charges," she stated, sounding positive. His eyes widened in sheer astonishment at her loyalty. "I couldn't care less about your boyfriend. If that fool hadn't stumbled, I would have given him a broken nose. And by the way, the verdict's still out," Tom remarked. "Let him press charges. I've already spent a night in jail. It doesn't intimidate me." "Fair point. This could serve as compelling evidence," she said, flashing a half smile. "Do you love him?" Alice fell silent, briefly gathering her thoughts. "Yes." Her admission hung in the air, and silence once again filled the conversation, signaling potential trouble ahead. "He's not my boyfriend. Nothing at all happened. Yes, I should have informed you about the change in travel plans, but it seemed insignificant. Whether I was in town or in Boston, it made no difference. You weren't expecting me, and I was still committed to the team. All we did was have dinner before retiring to our rooms. There was no reason for you to react as you did. He merely brought drinks. You completely humiliated me in front of my team." Now in full defensive mode, she attempted to maintain composure and feign indifference. He retrieved his phone, brought up the message, and slid it across the coffee table to her. Judging by her expression, he knew she recalled the photo and the circumstances. Realizing denial was futile, without further delay, she began again. He picked up his phone, activated the voice recording app, and placed the phone in his shirt pocket. "Tom, our team," she hesitated, searching for words. "We're very close-knit in many respects. Most of us," she continued. We have a small group that meets regularly. Bradley hosted us all. We were the ones shouldering the majority of the concerns and proposal preparation. You know how much time I invested in our proposal. I can't pinpoint when it began. It was sometime after Pete assumed leadership. We collaborated closely and I was drawn to him, and it just happened, Alice confessed. Intentionality, he interjected. Lovemaking isn't spontaneous. First, you undress. There are numerous conscious choices involved. We both understand that, so please spare me. So nearly 6 months, he answered his own query. That's when Pete secured the contract, correct? She nodded. Team, he resumed. All of you. He refrained from labeling the notion. I mean, are you all involved? She nodded once more. Yes, Pete believed it fostered trust and team cohesion. Is that how he persuaded everyone to initiate a company? Lovemaking team? Now you're being disrespectful. It's much deeper than that. I feel deeply connected to Pete and my team more than ever, Alice's confidence surged. He sensed trouble brewing. Unfortunately, you'll witness some personnel changes in your team, Tom stated. What have you done? Alice gasped. Tom, if you tell anyone else, it'll cause further injury. Let them decide for themselves. We must accept it, Alice. I can't stay silent and be complicit. I favor Bob and Hannah, actually. I prefer them over Betty and Bill, he remarked. I informed them that my travel plans appear to have shifted. How your friends respond to their spouses, and how their spouses accept these responses, is their choice. I can rest peacefully with my decision. Tom, we boast the most productive team in CR Inc. history, she almost shouted at him. And you benefited too, sir. Just because we held team meetings on Wednesdays doesn't mean you missed out. I never excluded you. You always had access whenever you needed it. So I was socializing with my team earlier, and you were unaware. Do you want to discuss that photo you showed me? She taunted. So now, just because you know, and just because your ego is bruised, you want to diminish everything my team and I have accomplished, Alice hissed, growing angrier by the moment. It excited me. Tom's heart rate surged as Alice continued to defend her team's actions, and he briefly entertained the thought of forgiving her during the ride home from Bradley's. If this was just a one-time thing with Pete, that notion had long since perished. He didn't need to hear anymore. He didn't want to hear anymore, but she persisted. No, sir, we won't let you off the hook. You should text Bob and Hannah to let them know you heard from me. We're stuck in Atlanta but have flights booked for tomorrow morning. That's the story Betty and Bill will stick to, and you'll support them. Got it? She yelled. There's millions at stake in this deal, and your complaints mean nothing. Send the message, then we'll discuss our next steps. What next? Tom yelled back. There is no next. Are you leaving now? You, your messed up team, and your leader Pete can carry on however you want. We're finished. I'll find a lawyer this week and settle everything. It's a straightforward 50-50th split. You keep your pension, I keep mine, Tom declared. Go. You have reservations in the city, use them. Head to Boston and chalk up another big win for you and your team. Tom, please, send those messages, Alice pleaded, her tone much softer now. If we lose Betty or Bill before the presentation, the company could lose millions, both for you and me. We could miss out on tens, maybe hundreds of thousands in commissions and bonuses. Just think of the possibilities with that money. Just us. Forget about this misunderstanding, please, Tom. Don't let baseless concerns about casual lovemaking ruin everything. Pete says I'm on track for CEO status. I just need to keep doing what we're doing for a few more years. Don't you want that for me, for us? Alice implored. Just leave, he barely managed to utter. A word before a forceful blow struck his back, knocking the wind out of him, leaving him sprawled on the floor with a knee pressed into his back. Don't injure him, Alice interjected. At least not too much, she added. So the jury's still out on whether my nose was broken, huh? Pete remarked, leaning in beside me as I lay pinned. Tom suspected there must be a transmitter. Now I know whose side she's on. Let's see whose nose ends up broken, Pete grinned. Grab his damn phone and send these damn texts for him. We don't have time for this nonsense, someone instructed, hoisting him from the floor. Only one person. Tom feigned offense, causing the person behind him to exert considerable effort to lift him, providing valuable insight. His adversary was a weak office type, wheezing from the exertion of lifting Tom to his feet. After being used as a punching bag, Tom caught his breath and returned to the fray. Unlike Pete and his team of polished salesmen, Tom's team operated in the field with the 160th SOAR Detachment from Fort Campbell, California. Though they weren't on the same level, after working alongside the crews on test missions, they were invited to support the Pillsbury trials under the tutelage of seasoned veterans who piloted aircrafts modified by Tom's team, specifically for their needs. If these individuals showed up at your door, it signaled the end of your days on Earth. Tom and his team developed the equipment necessary to enter hotspots and, crucially, to extricate themselves from them. They took pride in their contributions, ensuring mission success and the safe return of all personnel. The members of the 160th and their formidable passengers deeply appreciated the hard work Tom's team invested in making their gear operational. Among them, Staff Sergeant Troy Baker was the most intimidating figure. Renowned throughout his sphere, from vagrants to colonels, everyone accorded him the respect he earned by accompanying his men on missions worldwide. He was renowned for his steadfast commitment to never leaving anyone behind, a reputation solidified during the Columbia mission. Staff Sergeant Baker instructed the young lieutenant platoon leader to stick close. It was the lieutenant's maiden mission, and Staff Sergeant Baker thought he was handling it well for a rookie. When FARC rebels initiated gunfire and ambushed their team, they managed to fend them off. However, when he glanced back, he saw the lieutenant sprawled on the ground, bleeding from a head wound. "He's lost consciousness," the medic noted, assessing his vital signs. Baker knelt down, lifting him onto the fireman's carry. "Yoon's gone," the doctor reiterated. "Perhaps," Baker replied, "but he's still coming home with us." The medic regarded him as though he'd lost his mind. "We've got over 5 TRs back to the landing site through thick forest. We'll be lucky to make it back in one piece, but hauling a dead guy? What's this guy thinking?" The seasoned sergeant intercepted his thoughts. "I'd do the same for you, Billy," he assured the medic. "Stay close in case I need you." Their exploits became legendary upon their return to base. As the helicopter touched down, the doctor awaited them. The medic informed the doctor of the lieutenant's condition. Nodding, the doctor extracted a flashlight with a pen from his pocket. The medic watched in astonishment as the dead lieutenant's pupils contracted under the beam of light. "Care to reconsider your diagnosis, doctor?" the doc queried, hustling the revived lieutenant to the operating room. He was one of those timeless figures. He didn't talk much, but when he did, everyone listened. He was irreplaceable. In an age of mass production and disposability, he stood apart. He was crafted by hand, unique, and Tom and his team held a particular fascination with him. During the prolonged downtime between missions, the staff sergeant expressed his gratitude by imparting basic yet effective hand-to-hand combat techniques to Tom and the team. He advised the engineers to be prepared for unexpected situations. "I understand the biggest challenge you'll likely encounter is a jammed copier or a painful paper cut, but if you continue in this field, you might find yourself in interesting places. So, if you ever happen to encounter the local inhabitants, you'll have some useful knowledge," Staff Sergeant Baker shared with the group. "Let's hope that a paper cut remains the worst obstacle you'll ever face." Tom regulated his breathing, subtly leaning against his captor to feign compliance. Recalling the combat techniques demonstrated by the senior sergeant, Tom reflected, "You might find yourself in situations where you can't do much but endure the blows. It's not ideal, but it happens. The key is to remember that even when you're struck, you still have the ability to fight back. You just need to outsmart your opponent." Tom applied this lesson, passive resistance, sapping the strength of his solitary captor. "Give me the phone, Tom," Pete demanded, locking eyes with him. "Now that you know about my affair with your wife, you're just another feeble geek. Do as we say, and maybe you can still be with Alice when the team doesn't need her. Don't forget, the luxury is her bonus can afford you. Perhaps Alice will even buy you a synthetic companion for those lonely moments." Tom remained silent as Pete relished humiliating him by coercing compliance. "Where is it, Tom?" he inquired, noticing the outline of a phone in Tom's shirt pocket. "Ah, found it." He reached for it with his right hand. Tom forcefully withdrew his right heel, striking his captor's shin midway and pulling it down until it collided with his Gucci moccasin-clad toes. Flexing his arms, he broke free from the grip of his captor, eliciting a cry of pain as the captor tumbled beneath his weight, unable to support himself. Pete's eyes widened in recognition as Tom swiftly extended his right hand, executing a shoulder turn as the first sergeant had taught him, and delivered a powerful punch to the center of Pete's face with maximum force. Feeling a bone fracture beneath his fist, a geyser of blood spurted from Pete's nose as he crumpled to the ground, as if struck by an axe. Turning to identify his assailant, Tom discovered it was Bill, lying on the floor, clutching his leg and whimpering. "I think you broke my leg." Tom forcefully stomped on Bill's foot, eliciting another cry of pain. "That should erase any doubt," Tom retorted, pivoting to face Pete, who was attempting to rise to his knees, hands raised to his injured face. Leaning close, Tom whispered in Pete's ear, "Looks like you've got a broken nose, Pete, but I'm not willing to sacrifice for the team just yet," before delivering a firm blow to Pete's temple, causing him to slump back down. Adrenaline coursing through his veins, Tom scanned the living room for Alice. Suddenly, he felt a sharp blow to the middle of his back and the base of his neck, causing him to drop to one knee. Turning to confront the attack, he spotted Alice wielding a cast-iron frying pan. Her swing missed its mark, grazing Tom's side. Rising to his feet, Tom seized the frying pan. "Tom, we can still salvage this," Alice pleaded. "Think of the money you'll lose." "I'll put an end to this extramarital affair. I'll stop them, I promise. Just you and me, like old times." Rubbing the back of his head with his left hand, he gazed at her, astonished by how swiftly she was metamorphosing from one version of Alice to another. For a moment, he likened her transformation to the alien creature in John Carpenter's The Thing, adapting to each new situation. He chuckled at the analogy. Interpreting his smile as tacit approval of her final plea, Alice approached Tom for a hug. He lowered his left hand from his neck to steady her. Then after a brief pause, he raised his right hand and delivered a punch to her nose, not hard enough to render her unconscious, but sufficient to fracture a bone. Alice screamed and crumpled to the floor. "Doesn't it hurt?" Tom inquired. "Your eyes are watering, you can't see or breathe properly, and there's blood everywhere." "It's quite effective," he remarked. "Why did you slap me?" Alice cried out. "Because I could," he retorted. His phone remained on, recording the events. Although not all the recordings favored him, he believed he had enough evidence to justify his actions. Recalling the advice of the staff sergeant, he surveyed the room, decide when to act, and wait until the moment is right. But when you do act, do so decisively and persist until you're the only one left moving. He remembered. Except for Bill whimpering in the corner and Alice attempting to staunch the flow of blood from her nose, he was the only one in motion. "You've saved another ace," he thought. "Doesn't quite fit your profile, lover boy, and Mr. Bill will be fit for duty by Monday." "Such rotten luck, missing out on those millions and hefty bonuses," Tom mused aloud. "I wonder what Art will have to say about all this," he pondered, contemplating calling emergency services. He hesitated, realizing that involving the police would preclude his opportunity to interrogate Alice. He approached her, where she sat with a dish towel pressed to her face. Kneeling beside her, Tom demonstrated how to pinch the bridge of her nose with her thumb and index finger. The rush of adrenaline waned, leaving him drained, and he slumped heavily into the chair across from Alice. Where did my wife go? The Alice he encountered daily seemed vastly different from the woman sitting before him, prompting him to ponder how thoroughly she had deceived him. Was it worth it? He inquired. Alice glanced at him and shook her head. It could have been, she replied. If only you'd agree. We were on the verge. After Monday, I'd be on my way to the executive suite. This setback will delay everything. I can rectify it, but it's a setback. So becoming vice president was your ultimate dream? Tom queried. Or what about us? Deception, lies, will this persist? Tom, you're so naive. Pete saw this. He warned me that your rigid ethics and Boy Scout mentality would hinder my progress if I allowed them to. He urged me to break free from your influence and forge my own path to success. Did he advise you before or after he took advantage of you? Tom retorted. You don't know the half of it, she spat. I tried to adhere to your advice like a dutiful engineer, thinking it would enhance my career. You want to know what really works? Tom remained silent. Sometimes when someone's about to self-destruct, you just have to step aside, he continued, recording. Let me tell you, my dear husband, all your counsel didn't amount to much. I went above and beyond to ensure my assignments were completed punctually and within budget, only to receive a few well done, girl. It wasn't until Betty pulled me aside that I discovered what a woman truly needs to do to succeed. Believe me, leveraging lovemaking to climb the ladder works, and it's a whole lot easier and more enjoyable, she asserted. So this happened before Peter came into the picture? Tom queried. Oh, for a clever engineer, you sure can be dense sometimes, Tom, she quipped. It was at a Christmas party, a year after I joined CR, when I first surrendered to Art and never looked back. Wait, you're also sleeping with the boss, Art? Art Vand? Tom exclaimed. Yes, Tom, Art, Pete, Bill, and anyone else on the team who can advance my career. Even now, if you think you've covered all bases, we informed Art of our whereabouts when we headed here. Now he's rallying the rest of the team. They'll receive a fabricated story about our absence. They'll have to proceed without us, but I believe the extra effort we invested with their procurement managers will yield dividends. Do I really want to hear this? He pondered. What the heck, why not? Extra effort? Tom encouraged. You've always been proactive, Alice. It was so effortless that I hesitate to even call it effort, she chuckled. Reminds me of that old joke, you know. The worst lovemaking I ever had was still pretty good, she remarked. At the Bitter Conference, it was smooth sailing with the men, so we had to get a bit more creative with Brenda, the standout woman on the selection committee. It's amusing that I can even seduce a woman, but I had to enlist old Pete for a boost. And considering the assurances that we begin collaborating after sealing the deal, our selection committee appears flawless," she remarked. "Then why all this? I mean, if everything's in a haze, why resort to such aggressive tactics?" Tom inquired. "It was Pete's notion. Foolish. I urged him to relax, assured him I'd return home, pacify you, and make it back in time for the flight. But he insisted on asserting dominance. Look where it's landed us. Instead of being the face of the winning team, I'm here with you. As I said, it's salvageable, but it'll set me back." "You don't come so cheap," he countered. "Perhaps not," Alice acknowledged, "but I'd still soar." "Well, you certainly won't be flying now," he retorted. Recalling Pete's apparent knowledge, he suspected Alice had a transmitter. "Art, are you listening? I'll contact the authorities. I'm certain multiple felonies are involved, not to mention potential fraud." "This is a federal contract, right?" Tom posited rhetorically. "Yes. The feds aren't exactly lenient with what you call extra efforts. I'm sure you've got top-notch attorneys and all that, but perhaps there's an alternative," he hinted, leaving it at that. Moments later, Alice's phone rang with the tune of "Hail to the Chief." "Art," she answered, putting it on speaker. Art's voice filled the room. "Firstly, let me offer my apologies. Pete's actions were a blunder. I can assure you the board will address it firmly." "Thank you, Art." Tom felt a weight lift. "It's reassuring to see you and the board take assault and fraud seriously." "Tom, these are grave allegations. Lawyers will profit, but nobody wants to disrupt the status quo. We can pay the fines, Pete and Bill can do community service, but ultimately, you'll end up divorced and half as wealthy," Art explained matter-of-factly. "Is there an or in this scenario, Art?" Tom queried. "Alice always claimed you were the sharper of the two, yet I'm increasingly grateful I brought Alice aboard." "Indeed, Tom, there's certainly an or here," Art confirmed. "We supplanted you and your wife's affections, and when you confronted the issue, the response was utterly shameless, appalling." Tom grasped the situation. "Tom," Art continued, "instead of involving law enforcement as you suggested, we could reach a resolution. I've just sent a photo to Alice's phone, well, not myself, but one of my technicians. They assured me it vanishes post-viewing. Take a look. Perhaps this will mend some fences." Alice presented the image to Tom. It displayed Bank of Grand Cayman and a figure with numerous zeros. "And when will this come into play?" Tom inquired. "It's already in play, Tom. You've received an email with your account details. It's been a rough day for you, Tom. I understand if emotions cloud your judgment. Alice is deceitful, no doubt, but feelings don't count at the bank, correct?" "They just don't," Tom concurred, mimicking Art's tone. "CR will cover your divorce expenses. Reconciliation is off the table. It's evident Alice will pursue her share. She'll claim her personal effects and pension," he pondered momentarily before responding. On one hand, he could take a moral stance, expose the entire unsavory affair, and let the chips fall where they may. On the other, he could simply walk away. Art had just given him 5 million reasons to consider the latter. "Does CR have medical staff, Art?" Tom inquired. "Oh, certainly, Tom. We've got a few doctors on hand," Art responded. "All right," said Tom. "Better get a couple of them into the limo and send them over here for your team." "So, we're in agreement?" Art sought confirmation. "Regarding Alice?" Tom clarified. "Precisely," Art concurred. "Is that all?" Tom. "Farewell, Art," Tom stated, concluding the conversation. Tom retrieved his phone, deactivated the recording app, and returned it to his pocket. "I knew you'd see things our way, Tom. We can still be pals, maybe with benefits once this is all over," she suggested, flashing what she thought was her most charming smile. But even her bright grin couldn't mask the impact of her battered nose. Her eyes darkened, blood crusted beneath her nostrils, and dried droplets hung from her chin. Tom found the scene almost amusing and allowed himself a smile. Once again, Alice misunderstood his expression as agreement and leaned in for a kiss. Tom extended his right hand to halt her, then grasped her face and pushed her back until she crashed onto the sofa. "Either I slapped you too hard or not hard enough. Why would I ever want to kiss you, Alice?" She looked up at him, offended. "Take whatever you want, but don't be here tomorrow," Tom instructed, heading for the door. He paused beside Bill. "Still hurting, huh?" he asked. "Yeah, damn it, you idiot, it's still eliminating me," Bill complained. "Maybe this will take your mind off it," Tom remarked, delivering a swift kick to Bill's groin. Bill doubled over, groaning in pain. Tom got into his car, unsure of his destination, but food and shelter were high on his list of priorities. With that in mind, he grabbed a burger at a nearby cafe and checked into the Red Roof Inn just outside the city near the highway, falling asleep as soon as his head hit the pillow. Despite enduring the residual soreness from countless, well, at least 100, assorted injuries inflicted upon his body, he rose early in the morning and reluctantly hauled his aching frame out of bed. While brewing coffee in his motel room, his phone chimed, prompting him to reach for it. It was a message from that familiar number. Without delay, he opened it. "Apologies for yesterday. Let's meet at the mall around noon. I'll be waiting for you at the bar," the message read. He composed a reply and poured tepid brown liquid from the coffee maker carafe into a paper cup. "Yes, I'll be there," he mused, setting up his laptop. It was time to delve into online banking. Back in college, long before encountering Alice, Tom had a professor in economics who advocated for having at least one offshore account as a safety net. With nothing to lose and with the professor's guidance, he swiftly acquired a brand new bank account in the Cayman Islands. He dubbed it his Love You Foundation. Opening the account a decade ago, he diligently contributed whenever possible, amassing around $50,000 in savings. Now, his Love You Foundation was about to receive a significant injection. Tom logged into each bank's secure website with practiced ease, executing transfers from CR's payment into his personal account. He retained $100,000 in the original account. After showering and changing into fresh attire, he readied himself to rendezvous with the enigmatic sender of the message. Arriving just after noon, he spotted a man who gestured in his direction. Around his age, the man appeared suave and well-groomed. Tom approached him. "I believe you messaged me," he stated, taking a seat. "I regret how things unfolded." "Finding the right way to tell you wasn't easy," the stranger began. "Why don't you introduce yourself and explain your connection to Alice?" Tom countered. "I used to be on her team. After 8 years in the Army, I left due to injuries sustained in battle. Kay hired me about 6 months ago, and I joined Pete's team 3 months back. Mentioned working for Alice to a friend, and when he asked for her full name, we discovered a mutual friend. He asked me to watch out for Alice as a favor. Initially, everything was fine. I was warmly welcomed by the team, though the reasons weren't immediately clear," he explained. "Around 2 months later, Alice approached me. She's attractive and, well, persuasive. But when I inquired about the ring, she simply smiled and said, 'It's okay with you.' I didn't agree and made that clear. That's when things turned cold. I started getting the worst assignments and nothing but grief from Pete. I reached out to our mutual friend again, informing him of Alice's advances. He suspected there was more to the story and felt you should know. Pete sent me a photo of them attempting to entice me onto the team with a reward if I accepted. Let's just say I don't approve of their tactics. I consider myself honest. I quit yesterday and reached out to you," he disclosed. Our friend mentioned Tom, Troy Baker. "If it weren't for Troy," he replied, pausing briefly before continuing. "Let's just say he bailed me out of a tight spot when I was a rookie lieutenant. I owe him a few favors." "We both do," Tom concurred. "What's your plan?" the stranger inquired. "Art pretty much laid it out for me. I could involve the authorities, and yes, Bill, Pete, and even Alice would face legal repercussions. But with his legal team, it would likely end in nothing. We reached an agreement. You might view this as a compromise, and perhaps to some degree you're correct. But they took the only thing I couldn't replace. If I can't hold them legally accountable, I'll find another way to make them pay. It won't bring Alice back, but I may realize she's less indispensable than I believed. I've got a trip planned. Please pass on my gratitude to Troy for everything. I won't be returning to work," he stated. "And you?" Tom inquired. "Well, Troy always praises Baxter Inc. Now that you're gone, they might need another engineer. You'll find they have a different approach at Baxter. You might prefer it. The work is challenging, but the perks don't compare to what Tony's team offered," he explained. Tom grinned. "I think I can accept that." The stranger rose, and Tom followed suit. They exchanged a simple nod and departed without further words. Come Monday, Tom was at the airport, checking in for a flight to Costa Rica. Tamarindo seemed like a good place to unwind. Making his way toward security, he spotted a mailbox, retrieving an envelope from his pocket addressed to the U.S. Department of Justice, Washington, D.C. He dropped it in. Inside was a flash drive containing a recording. Maybe they'll be interested. Who knows? He mused. Perhaps Art's lawyers aren't as formidable as he believes. With that, he proceeded to the security line. 9 months later, Tom found himself seated at his usual spot in a cafe. Anna, as charming as ever, brought him his beer. "Thanks, dear," he said, lifting the bottle to his lips. A piece of mail caught his attention. He held the envelope in his hands. Devoid of a return address, he pondered who might have tracked him down, while he hadn't taken elaborate measures to conceal himself. Locating him in a small town on the Pacific coast of northern Costa Rica would require resources beyond the norm. His initial suspicion was that Art's associates had located him. He left the envelope untouched for 2 days, cautious but certain it wasn't a bomb. "Carlos," Tom called out to the cafe owner, "do you have a knife?" "See, Mr. Tom," Carlos replied. Tom handed him the envelope and stepped back cautiously. "You can never be too careful," he reminded himself as Carlos opened it. Carlos passed the contents to Tom, who thanked him. Taking another sip of his beer, he turned over the envelope. Several sheets of paper slid onto the table, including a note that simply read, "Thought you might be interested," with a telephone number instead of a signature. The same number, Troy would have the means to locate him, Tom surmised. "I can live with that." He flipped through another sheet, revealing a newspaper article with a photograph. The image depicted Pete, Bill, Alice, and Betty being escorted out of the CR building in handcuffs. The headline proclaimed, "4 accused of multi-million-dollar procurement fraud." Tom couldn't help but smile. Maybe Art's legal team isn't as formidable as he presumed, he mused, a habit he picked up due to his limited Spanish and a fondness for hearing English spoken, even if it was only by himself. "Anna, another beer, please," he requested, extending his empty bottle. "Sure thing, Mr. Tom," Anna replied. "Thank you, Anna," he acknowledged, taking a sip and gazing out at the vast expanse of the deep blue Pacific Ocean.
My wife slept with men from a bar, claiming she deserved it for having a baby, so I gave her payback. I, 32 male, married my wife Janet, 26 female, 3 years ago. We have a 7-month-old daughter. A couple of days back, I found something in her bag that blew my mind. It was a pack of condoms. I'm not the kind of guy who checks his wife's bag, but this time it was urgent. My wife was in the shower, and I needed a diaper to change my baby. I had put the baby on the changing table, and then I realized we had run short of one. I remembered my wife keeps a few diapers in her bag when she takes the baby for a walk. Her bag was lying near the baby counter, so it was easier for me to grab it. I opened it and found 2 diapers inside. While pulling one out, something fell from the bag to the floor, a pack of condoms. It was a pack of 3. The packet was open and only had 1 left. I checked the bag to see if the remaining 2 had fallen inside, but they were not there. That meant 2 had already been used. My baby was crying profusely, so I kept the condom inside my pocket and changed my baby. When Janet came out of the shower, I put the baby in the crib, pulled out the condom from my pocket, and asked Janet about it. The actor in her came out, and she outright denied it. She said it wasn't hers and tried to gaslight the situation, pinning it on me. I was shocked at how smoothly she could lie. I said I found it in her bag, but she replied, "But you just pulled it from your pocket, right?" I flipped out because she wasn't ready to accept it was hers. Then she burst out laughing and said, "Oh, poor you, look at your puppy face. I was messing with you." She winked as she said this. It was evident she was lying because we don't use protection. She's breastfeeding, and her cycle hasn't returned, so we don't use protection now. She dismissed me, saying her cycle was back to normal, so we might need protection if we don't want back-to-back kids. I asked her what happened to the other 2 condoms. There was just 1 inside the packet, but it should have been 3. She laughed and said it was a funny story. Yesterday, she bought it, then went out with friends. A guy was hitting on her friend Kyle, and things got heated up between them. They went to find a corner but didn't have a condom, so she lent them too. I gave her a look of disbelief and said, "Do you expect me to believe this?" She said yes, because that was the only truth. She even said I could call Kyle and ask for myself. I didn't call her because if Janet was lying, then Kyle was obviously on board and would lie too. So, what's the point? I didn't call her but told Janet that I wasn't buying her crap, so she needed to come clean about whatever she had been up to. Now, she's gaslighting me and trying to guilt-trip me, saying I don't trust her. She's weeping, saying I don't understand her and that she just delivered a baby and is going through postpartum depression. And amidst all this, I'm accusing her of cheating. I've not tried to make things up with her, I've left it that way, but she's made the environment murky. She's just curling up in bed in a dark room, refusing to switch on the lights, saying she doesn't like the brightness and she's not eating at all. I'm not sure how she is when I'm not home, but this is what she's been doing since the confrontation. I'm the one who usually apologizes right after our fights because, hardly any woman breaks the ice and says sorry first. However, this time, I just don't feel like apologizing at all. I don't think I did anything wrong by asking her upfront about the condoms. Do you guys think I could have done anything differently? Seriously, if she's using postpartum depression as a get-out-of-jail-free card for handing out condoms like Halloween candy, maybe it's time for a different kind of delivery, a reality check. Though I have to admit, her excuse game is stronger than her commitment to honesty. As for what you could have done differently, well, you could have packed your own emergency condom in the diaper bag. Or who knows? Maybe next time she'll pull out a clown nose and claim it's for stress relief. Update 1. Thank you for engaging with my post. You guys are right in saying she flashed the red flag right across my face. Yes, she did, and I didn't let it slide. Some of you asked for more information about Janet to comment on the situation. Well, Janet and I have known each other for over 6 years. We met at a friend's party. She was the most gorgeous woman there. We spent the evening together talking, dancing, and having fun, but I forgot to ask for her number. I'm not a party person, but it was my friend's promotion party, and he insisted I attend. I asked my friend about Janet, and he said he didn't know her either. She was his colleague's friend. I requested my friend to ask his colleagues for Janet's number. He was reluctant to do so because my friend was married, and he didn't want his colleagues to think he was hitting on Janet. After a lot of convincing, he got her number. I kept it for a week before texting her. I didn't know how she would take it. I didn't want to come across as desperate or cheap. I mean, she was gorgeous, and I'm sure there were many men at the party who wanted her number. Nonetheless, I mustered the courage and messaged her. Luckily, she replied that she regretted not asking for my number. From there on, we hit it off. She was working a part-time job. She said she didn't have a full-time job because it involved a lot of commitment, and she liked to live freely on her terms. That could have been a red flag, but I didn't think of it that way. I was deeply immersed in my work and was not enjoying it. I wanted to be free like her, so it kind of clicked for me. After dating for 2 years, I proposed to her, and we got married in a close ceremony with friends and family. Janet didn't want to spend money on a grand wedding. She wanted to use that money for a vacation instead. After the wedding, we went on a 15-day trip to Europe. 1.5 years after the marriage, Janet got pregnant. She freaked out because we didn't plan it that way. We wanted to travel the world together and do a bunch of stuff before having a baby. She wanted to get rid of it. I was not happy with her decision. I love kids and wanted one. But since she had different plans, I never forced her into pregnancy. But when she got pregnant unexpectedly, I tried to convince her to keep the baby. She was in 2 minds, but ultimately, she kept it. Pregnancy is tough and cranky for women anyway, and since I was the one who convinced her to keep it, I had to face the brunt of it. I did everything to keep her happy. Thankfully, her pregnancy was without complications, yet she threw tantrums, and I happily took it because, it was her time. After the baby came, she became worse. I thought it was because of the lack of sleep and tiredness from nursing the baby. She got so depressed, feeling caged, that she couldn't have her former freedom. I took her to therapy, and the doctor said it was postpartum depression, which was natural for all women post-delivery. I tried everything to give her the freedom she needed. I hired a full-time nanny so she could have free time to herself. Our daughter was 2 months old when Janet resumed her life of partying and going out with her friends as she used to before. I never stopped her because the doctor said a happy mom would nurture her baby. 7 months later, here we are. I found a condom in her bag, and she's throwing her best friend under the bus to save her pretty butt. Coming to the updates, as I mentioned earlier, Janet was trying to gaslight the situation, but I didn't give in. I told her if she thought she could put up an act and get away with her actions, then she was wrong. I'm not going to let this go until she tells me the truth because what she said earlier was pure BS. Since she wasn't opening up, I started digging on my own. I wanted to check her phone, but she's so guarded about it that I could never access it. Even when she would sleep, she kept it next to her or under her pillow. She has always been like that with her phone, so I never questioned her. Directly asking her to show her phone wasn't an option either. She would make a big fuss about how I was doubting her and blah blah. I don't know how else to get the evidence because this woman has no conscience, and she's not going to confess. Any suggestions are greatly welcomed. If Janet's guarding her phone like it's a state secret, you might need to channel your inner James Bond and get a bit creative. Maybe you could enlist the help of a distraction master, like, I don't know, a baby with an insatiable curiosity for shiny objects? While Janet's busy wrangling the little one, you could sneakily swipe her phone and dive into the depths of her digital secrets. Or hey, if you're feeling particularly bold, you could try the classic accidental spill maneuver. Oops, honey, looks like I accidentally knocked over my drink onto your phone. Let me grab some paper towels while you clean that up. Just make sure you've got a backup plan for when she starts suspecting foul play. And maybe a pre-packed suitcase and a one-way ticket to a land where lies and deception are just a distant memory. Remember, in this game of cat and mouse, sometimes the mouse has to get a little crafty to outsmart the cat. Just watch out for any trap doors. Janet might be hiding more than just her phone and her bag of tricks. Update 2, thanks for the advice. As most of you suggested, I was about to hire a PI on her, but before that, I found a way myself. One Sunday, I just thought of stalking her social media account. I couldn't find anything from a public view, but her picture with her best friend Kyle caught my eye. I stalked Kyle's profile and got to know she was married and had a toddler. The other day, Janet said that Kyle was making out with a guy at a bar and needed the condom. I was like, wait a minute, does her husband know about all this? I went to Janet and said, hey, I'm sorry that I doubted you about the condom thing. I trust you. If you said it was Kyle, it should be her. She smiled at me. I asked her if Kyle does this often. She said yes and started listing down some incidents where Kyle made moves on men at the bar. I didn't know how true it was or if she was just making it up to cover for herself. After listening to her supposedly funny incidents about Kyle, I dropped the bombshell. I said, well, that's funny. By the way, isn't Kyle married and doesn't she have a toddler? Are you guys supporting her in her cheating? Does her husband know about all this? She froze like an iceberg and then started ranting, no, that's not what I meant. It's just healthy flirting and nothing else. I intervened. But you just shared so many stories of her picking up men from the bar. And why would she need a condom for healthy flirting? She said, oh, did I say Kyle? My bad stupid pregnancy brain. I meant Kiara, my single friend. She's the one who's goofing around. Kyle is the sober one, she doesn't do all that stuff. I was in awe of how swiftly this woman could make up stories. I laughed and said, I caught you. You don't have to save Kyle's butt. Are you worried that I would tell Kyle's husband the truth? She said, yes, please don't do that. It would ruin their marriage. They have a baby. Please, she loves her husband dearly. It was just meaningless sex and nothing more. I looked at her with a smile. I knew she was lying for herself, not for Kyle. Everything she told me about Kyle was actually Janet's, but she wouldn't confess so easily. I told her I wasn't feeling good about Kyle cheating on her husband, so I was going to tell her husband everything. Janet screamed at me, why are you acting like a saint? Who are you to do the moral policing here? And blah, blah, blah. I said I wasn't listening to anything. I'm going to tell Kyle's husband everything. She mellowed down and started sobbing. I got the vibe that she was about to confess, but I wasn't ready for it yet. I stormed inside my room and locked it. I didn't want her to get away with her infidelity by just confessing. I wanted my revenge. This cheating is not only going to cost her the marriage, but also her friendship. I texted Kyle on Instagram and told her that Janet had told me about her dirty little secret. She was aghast. I sent her the recordings where Janet was ranting stories about Kyle's affair. Kyle left me on read, but I heard Janet's phone ringing a few moments later. Janet was banging at the door, crying and yelling. Why are you doing this to me? Open the door. Why are you destroying everything? Why can't you trust me? She was probably still on the phone with Kyle because she yelled, he's not opening the door. God knows what he's up to. Then Kyle called me. She asked me to listen to Janet. I said I wasn't going to listen to anyone, and the next thing I would do was send the recording to her husband. She freaked out and pleaded with me not to do anything before listening to Janet. I said I was going to call her husband, and then we could both listen to all the stories together. She blurted out that whatever Janet said wasn't Kyle's story but Janet's, and she had been cheating on me for over 4 months. I asked her why she didn't stop her friend. Kyle said she and the other girls did try to knock some sense into her, but Janet would argue that she gave me a beautiful baby, so she deserved this little pleasure. Fair enough. I was convinced that Kyle was telling the truth. My gut feeling hinted at this truth long before, but I wanted to cut off all support systems for Janet. I asked Kyle to come over along with her husband. I don't know if I went too far, but I wanted Kyle's husband to know what a piece of crap Janet was and that he should keep Kyle away from her. Kyle agreed to come, but she requested that I not show the recordings to her husband because Janet was so good at storytelling that anyone would believe it to be true. She didn't want her husband to doubt her unnecessarily. I said fine. Kyle was at my house within an hour. I was locked in my room until she arrived. The moment she came, I heard Janet shouting at her, "Why are you here? I told you I'd manage. Now go away. I'm going to deal with this." I came out while Kyle was yelling at Janet for falsely framing her. It was just too much chaos, with both of them screaming at each other. Kyle's husband intervened and asked Janet to tell her side of the story. Kyle gave Janet a look as if to say, "Don't you dare lie." Janet sobbed and confessed everything. She admitted that the incidents she had told me were not about Kyle, they were all hers. She had been picking up men from the bar and sleeping with them. Kyle's husband was shocked that Janet was such a witch. She was cheating and then making her friend a scapegoat to get away with it. He yelled at Kyle, "This is the kind of friend you've been hanging out with?" Or she was about to wreck our marriage. After Janet was done with her confession, Kyle and her husband stood up and left. Kyle said, "Don't you ever contact me. I love my husband and my family. You are not worth losing them." Janet held Kyle's hand and started crying, but Kyle shrugged her off and walked away. After they left, Janet looked at me and said, "Are you happy now? What did you gain by humiliating me in front of my friend and her husband? Is this what men do?" I glared at her and said, "Your woman card is not going to work anymore. You've used all your cards, pregnancy, postpartum, everything. Now I'm going to show you the consequences of your actions. The humiliation you're talking about is just halfway through. You have more to come. This is not over. You said you deserved to cheat on me because you gave me a baby, right? I'm going to give you what you deserve. Just wait." I took my stuff and went into the other room. I called my lawyer and discussed my case. I told him to find any loopholes in the law and get me full custody of my daughter. He asked me to gather all the evidence of Janet's negligence toward the baby, like her drinking and partying habits and her hookups. He said he would build a case around child safety, that it wasn't safe for a child to live with a mother who brings new men into the house every day. I don't know how promising this is, but I'm definitely up for a fight to have full custody of my little girl. I'm going to protect her from her liar and cheater mother. I'll update you when all this is over. Looks like Janet's little house of cards came crashing down faster than a Jenga tower in an earthquake. Who knew playing detective on social media could lead to such a dramatic reveal? But hey, at least you finally peeled back the layers of Janet's deceit like a particularly juicy onion. And speaking of onions, it seems like she's crying enough tears to water a whole field of them. But sorry, Janet, no amount of crocodile tears is going to undo the mess you've made. Now it's time for the real show to begin, the legal battle for custody. It's like a high-stakes game of Monopoly, except instead of hotels on Park Place, you're fighting for the future of your daughter. And let's be honest, Janet's behavior makes her about as trustworthy as a used car salesman in a clown suit. So gear up, strap in, and get ready to fight tooth and nail for your little girl. And hey, if Janet wants to play the victim card, she better be prepared for you to bring out the whole deck of evidence against her. It's time to show her that actions have consequences, and cheating your way through life doesn't fly when there's a child's well-being at stake. Update 3. Sorry, I had to delete my last update. I had revealed my lawyer's plan for getting full custody from Janet, which I shouldn't have done. The day after posting the update, when I met my lawyer, he asked me not to discuss the case with anyone. I told him I posted this on Reddit anonymously. He asked me to delete it as soon as possible. Now that everything is over, I've reposted it. It's available on my profile page. I'm still not allowed to get into the nitty-gritty of the law, but here are the other details. After the confrontation, I slept in the guest bedroom. I tried to have minimal encounters with Janet. She would try to get close to me and make me breakfast and dinner, but I shrugged her off. She even made a sorry cake and bought flowers and cards. She thought I would get over it once my anger subsided. She had no clue what was coming her way. Almost a month later, my lawyer came to my place with the divorce papers. Janet freaked out. She was terrified when she was served. She looked at me helplessly, asking, "What are you doing? Or how could you do this to me?" After the attorney left, I asked her to pack her stuff and leave. She cried and pleaded for a chance to save our marriage for the sake of the baby. She tried to hug me, but I pushed her away. She said she had nowhere to go. I chuckled and said, "Not my problem anymore. I gave you everything you wanted. Now I'm going to give you what you deserve, and you deserve to be on the streets." She threatened to take away the last penny I had. I said, "Sure, good luck hiring a lawyer. The good ones don't come for free unless you want to spread your legs to pay them." She went toward my daughter's nursery, but I blocked her, saying, "Whoa, you're not getting her. She's not living on the streets with you." She broke down, saying I was ripping her away from her daughter. I said, "You're not interested in being a mother, are you? I'm freeing you from all responsibility. You can now live the life you wanted." She packed her stuff and left. My lawyer built a strong case to get full custody, hiring a full-time nanny, taking work-from-home jobs, etc. But it turned out that Janet wasn't keen on keeping the baby anyway. She didn't have a house or a job, so she didn't fight for custody at all. However, she went bonkers trying to claim alimony. I had to pay a certain amount, can't disclose, sorry, to get rid of her. But it was way too low compared to what she was demanding. It was completely worth it to get her out of my life. Kyle and her husband visited me one day to check on the baby. Kyle apologized for not informing me about Janet's hookups. She said she tried to stop Janet from cheating, but she didn't listen. She was sorry for the baby. Kyle said she was glad I took full custody because Janet wasn't involved with the baby and wouldn't be able to raise her properly like I was doing. Kyle told me that Janet would always complain about how fussy and cranky the baby was, and so on. She was overplaying her postpartum thing. Kyle's husband informed me that Janet had reached out to them for help, but he had chased her away. Since then, Janet had been shuffling from one friend's couch to another, and her drinking habit had gotten worse. I said I don't care what she does with her life now. They offered to help with babysitting. I thanked them for their kind gesture, but I don't think I'll need them. My parents have moved in with me to help with the baby, and we also have a full-time nanny, so I think the baby is going to be fine. I might let her meet her mother someday, but not now. She's just happy and safe with her dad. Hey, at least you've got full custody of your little bundle of joy. And Janet's off gallivanting through the land of couch surfing and cheap booze. It's like a modern-day fairy tale, except instead of a happily ever after, you've got a deadbeat ex and a baby who's better off without her. And as for Janet's alimony demands, well, let's just say she's about as likely to get that as she is to win the lottery while riding a unicorn. But hey, at least she's got a talent for consistency, consistently making bad life choices, that is. So here's to you, OP, bravely navigating the murky waters of divorce and custody battles like a seasoned sailor in a sea of chaos. May your days be filled with diapers and giggles, and may Janet's antics serve as a cautionary tale for generations to come. Cheers to you, OP. You've earned every bit of peace and quiet that comes your way. What would you have done? Thank you for joining us today.
I can't believe how messed up my life has become in just 4 years. 4 years ago, my wife started working at Gilbert Endeavors. Our kids were teenagers, and Sarah couldn't wait to leave the house. Back then, an entry-level secretarial job seemed like the right choice. I'm Skip Trexler, but everyone calls me Skip. I was a wiry guy, average height, weighing less than 140 pounds. In high school, I wasn't into sports, but I enjoyed long-range shooting. Throughout high school and college, I spent most of my free time either shooting or reloading. After 8 years, I became skilled at hitting a 2-inch target at 100 yards. My favorite weapon was the Marlin 336C with a caliber cartridge 219. Even though this cartridge was no longer in production, I made my own from 30-30 shells. Achieving success in this gave me a much-needed sense of pride. 2 important things happened in college. I met my wife Sarah and my future business partner Chuck Fuller. Besides, it was a bit boring. I got a degree in geology, got married, and started a small surveying business with Chuck. Life was good. We never worked for anyone. After college, we each invested $2,500 and started our own small surveying company. We focused on small jobs and real estate sales. We didn't make a lot of money, but we felt comfortable and happy. Chuck married a local girl 3 months after Sarah and I did. My family had a bungalow in Schuylkill County on 160 acres where we held all our family gatherings. When I was younger, the Fullers had a cabin on 640 acres in Potter County. Chuck and his family only used it for hunting. That's all you need to know for now. As I mentioned, my life started going downhill about 4 years ago. Gilbert Endeavors designed and manufactured trainers. Though their headquarters were local, they had manufacturing plants and distribution centers across the country. Sarah, my wife, started working there when our twin daughters, Marcy and Mercy, entered high school. Initially, it seemed like a good idea. Good hours, fair pay, and a convenient location. The first year or so was perfect. GE hired Terry Ulrich, a former NFL quarterback, as a marketing manager and company spokesman. Unfortunately, my wife worked in the marketing department for 6 months. We were bombarded with stories about the magnificent Terry Ulrich, and my wife and daughters were crazy about his greatness. Luckily, the adoration faded after about 6 months. Around the same time, Sarah started working overtime. Chuck and I, being locals, knew many people working at Gilbert. It wasn't hard to find out that Sarah and Terry Ulrich became a couple. As their relationship grew, our marriage deteriorated, and I grew distant from my daughters. I never told her about this. She began to travel more on business and promotional trips, and I became a non-entity most of the time. She invited me to parties and gatherings where I was ignored for the entire evening. Closeness was out of the question. How can someone endure such a life? Before Sarah started working, our family life was normal. Weekends and vacations with the whole family, ballet lessons, football, PTA, and scouts. Every week we had a pizza night. The only thing the girls didn't like was spending time in the bungalow. All of that is in the past now, disappearing over the past few years. Sarah's conference attendance, retreats, and meetings gradually increased. Lately, on several longer trips, she took the girls with her, never inviting or asking if I wanted to go. I often overheard the girls telling their friends about the great time they had. They never said anything when they knew I could hear. Terry Ulrich was never mentioned, although I knew he was on every trip. At Gilbert's New Year's party, everything fell into place. It was hard for Sarah not to invite me. I didn't want to go. The humiliation of facing infidelity alone was bad enough. I was afraid I wouldn't be able to control myself if things got out of hand. I was right. All the girls were dressed up, excited for their first adult party. I didn't have a tuxedo, so I wore the best suit I had. When we arrived, there were hundreds of people milling around. "Skip Trexler, it's good to see you. Thank you for bringing your wife and beautiful daughters." Terry Ulrich seemed to smile as he squeezed my hand, and Sarah smirked. The girls looked at me with disgust and quickly left. It was the start of a terrible evening. I drank a glass of beer and hid in a corner, trying not to embarrass my wife and daughters even more. I didn't say or do anything, yet I managed to ruin the start of their evening. Terry Ulrich was a big guy, really big, at least a foot taller and 100 pounds heavier than me, all muscle. He embodied happiness and success. My daughters flocked around him, while my wife spent most of the evening next to him, lightly holding his hand. Lower-level people made feeble attempts to talk to me, and mid- and senior-level managers noticed me, smirking or making sly remarks related to my new status. I didn't hear their words, but it was clear what was happening. My beer was replaced with a simple ginger ale, which I sipped slowly. I usually kept myself in control and took pride in never losing my composure. People started dancing, and I noticed the girls having a good time, including my wife with Ulrich. In the last 3 hours, neither she nor the girls spoke to me. A small group on the dance floor pointed at Sarah and Ulrich, laughed when they looked my way, and quickly turned away when I caught them giggling. That marked the end of my evening. I put the glass down, headed to the door, and saw Ulrich with his hands on my wife's rear while she caressed the back of his head. Before I knew it, she pulled his head down and gave him a big kiss on the dance floor. It took me less than 5 seconds to cross the room, spin Ulrich around, and hit him as hard as I could with a roundhouse right. My arm hurt like hell, and the next thing I knew, I was waking up in the back of an ambulance. The ride to the emergency hospital was a few minutes, and I noticed I was the only one in the ambulance. I remembered being wheeled into the emergency room and waking up in a recovery zone. A doctor visited me half an hour later, sharing the latest news on my condition. Besides the broken arm, I had 3 broken ribs, a broken nose, 3 knocked out teeth, and 2 loose ones. My jaw was clamped with wire, and my right kidney was bruised. Ulrich finished it off with a good blow to the testicles, causing several blood vessels to be damaged. The doctor said I could be discharged in about 4 days, but I'd have to spend at least 2 weeks in rehab. I chose the first option. Late afternoon, my wife and daughters finally appeared. Sarah appeared annoyed, the girls looked bored, and nobody said anything. With my tense jaw, I hesitated to start a conversation. I could talk, but I didn't want her to know. Assessing her attitude, I decided I didn't need this conversation. Instead of answering, I just muttered and pointed at my jaw. We sat there for a good minute before she spoke again. I was embarrassed. She conveyed that the girls were so humiliated that we had to leave before the new year. The whole evening was ruined. And for what? She expressed regret, mentioning she should have known what it would be like to take me out in public. She guaranteed that nothing like this would happen again. Little did she know how right she was. I just sat and looked at her, unable to manage a smile, so I didn't do anything. They lingered for several minutes, and since I didn't react, they eventually got up to leave. Chuck showed up a couple of hours later. We chatted for a few minutes. Yes, I could talk. Then he pulled out the local newspaper. I made it to the front page. The story was about how I attacked my wife at the Gilbert Endeavor's New Year's Eve party. Chuck and I talked for a couple of hours, discussing several options. After he left, I refused dinner and asked for sleeping pills. I needed a good long rest. Most of the next day involved being checked, probed, and poked. All damage was discovered, and appropriate measures were taken. Now all I could do was wait and heal. A hospital staff member gave me a list of recommended rehab centers, and I chose one near Hamburg. Chuck showed up later that evening. I sold him my share of the company for $2,500, with the handshake being the most important part of the deal. I was still a co-owner, but not on paper. Good things take time. We laughed about the fact that 1 week in rehab cost $2,500. Sarah and the girls never saw me again in the hospital. They came back the day after I moved into rehab, annoyed that they weren't notified. They were very angry when they came to rehab and were denied access. It looks like I was able to specify who could and couldn't visit. When I logged in, an orderly informed me they were trying to meet with me. My ribs hurt like hell when I laughed. And the worst part of my injuries was the dental work. Luckily, they had a dentist who could work on site for a certain fee, and I decided to take advantage of this. The wound on my hand wasn't as serious as they initially thought. Although I had the opportunity to leave rehab a little earlier, I decided to stay for the full 2 weeks. 10 days later, I was able to breathe deeply again. It was nice. Sarah never tried to visit me again. The National CrossFit Show happened in Atlantic City on the second weekend of February. Sarah and the girls were in attendance, along with Terry Ulrich and the GE marketing team. Chuck and some of our team spent the weekend moving my stuff to a bungalow in Schuylkill County. He made sure to take my Marlin rifle and reloading supplies. In 2 days, I was settled in my new home. Chuck and his wife June visited that weekend. It seemed Sarah was looking for me at the office. There had been no deposits into the joint account since the year began, and Sarah wanted an explanation. Chuck spent half an hour explaining that I no longer owned part of the company and didn't work there. In desperation, she ran out threatening to meet with a lawyer. After a couple of weeks, I was back to normal, doing therapy and exercises as directed. Chuck left me with a company truck and a credit card. I also took a substantial amount of cash with me. I left my phone with Chuck. The bungalow was cozy but temporary. I walked and started jogging leisurely. Terry Ulrich had a large house on Duryea Street just outside of town. It was a long winding road up Mount Penn, with few houses due to the steep mountainside. Finding the house wasn't hard, and I found good secluded vantage points. Every morning, I exercised to get in shape. After lunch, I practiced target shooting, focusing on inanimate targets. My Bushnell laser rangefinder indicated I needed to be accurate at 133 yards. I bought a lot of eggs and a muffler. Evenings were spent planning, adjusting, and recharging. I grew a beard. Chuck visited every 2 weeks, while Sarah tried to find me at the office, but gave up after 2 months. Chuck brought newspaper clippings, showing my wife and daughters enjoying the high life with their new benefactor. Sarah and the girls still lived in our old house, puzzling me. It was time to move on. I started heading back into town early in the morning to watch Terry's house. He swam 50 laps every morning, even in a heated pool on weekends. I went to Potter County. The move from a bungalow to a hut was welcome. No electricity, running water, or cell phone signal. The nearest Walmart was a 45-minute drive in Olean, New York. I stocked up on everything for the next 4 months. Early Wednesday morning, I moved my stuff from the truck into my Subaru Outback. I parked the company truck at a construction site and climbed to my chosen vantage point. In the morning, I set up a tripod with a round in the chamber and 2 at the ready. 20 minutes later, Terry Ulrich went out for his morning swim. The first shot shattered his right ankle. Even with a muffler, it was noisy this early. 2 seconds later, his left knee exploded, and I loaded the next 2 rounds, taking out his left elbow. My final target, his right wrist, was hard to aim at due to his erratic movements. I left quietly. 10 minutes later, I left the construction site and returned to the office to the Subaru waiting for me. I didn't go back to the bungalow, but straight to Potter County. The first step was to clean the water source for fresh water. After that, I collected firewood and found the cabin well insulated and watertight. LED lights replaced old carbon oil lamps. Soon, everything was under control, and I started shooting again, this time at paper targets. In the middle of the second week, I saw her for the first time. She was a tall woman on an old logging trail with a backpack. She passed by, and I set up a fire pit with coffee and cookies, feeling like I was setting a trap. 3 days later, my trap worked. Claire apologized and introduced herself. She expressed a hope for conversation, and we sat down. I offered her some coffee, the best I could do. She nodded, smiled, and took off her crossbow before sitting down. I shared that my name is Skip, and that I arrived here about 2 weeks ago. I mentioned spotting her in the area a few times and staying at a lodge about a mile from there. I explained my daily routine and handed her a cookie. I inquired about the duration of her stay, and she said she'd be there until the end of the summer. I mentioned my plans to stay for at least 4 or 5 months. She seemed to enjoy my cookies, although I sensed she preferred cream and sugar in her coffee. Noticing her silence, I asked if the property belonged to her. She clarified that it belonged to her friend, who allowed her to use it. When she asked if I was hunting, I explained that I used to shoot a little, but hadn't done anything for years. Currently, I was just doing some target shooting. I then invited her to use the shooting range for practice with her bow. She had an accent I couldn't quite place, but I refrained from asking about it. She accepted the offer and ate a second cookie, leaving me with a good feeling. I couldn't help but express my curiosity. I thought most folks use compound bows nowadays, but your recurve bow looks brand new. Trust me, it has better curvature. She used simple arrows for target practice, but always had 4 hunting arrows mounted on her bow. That evening, I drove several miles down the road and picked up 3 bales of hay. This marked the beginning of my summer with Claire Charles. Claire visited daily and returned home every evening. The lodge staff tracked her through her cell phone, so they always knew her whereabouts. At the start of our second week, a strong summer squall hit us. We huddled on the cabin porch, laughing and poking fun at her predicament. Without saying a word, she took out her phone and called the lodge, explaining that she couldn't return due to the weather and had found a comfortable place to stay for the night. I was both surprised and delighted. This is how my platonic relationship with Claire Charles turned into a close one. From then on, we alternated our sleeping spots. Highlands Lodge felt out of place in Potter County, being luxurious and expensive. Most guests were from overseas, and Claire's family hailed from Cornwall. The lodge provided hot showers, abundant food, and laundry services, which I fully utilized. Outdoor activities are enjoyable, but they're even better with everything you need. We spent less time at the shooting range. A couple of weeks later, while having lunch, Chuck and June arrived. June seemed especially pleased that I had a companion, more so when she realized it was a full-fledged relationship. We kept a low profile for the first few hours, and then June and Claire went off to chat. After the tragic attack on Terry Ulrich, I became the primary suspect. This posed a more significant problem for Terry than he anticipated. The press wanted to know why I was the main focus of interest. As they delved into it, things got worse for Terry and my wife. Though the spotlight was on finding me, the press quickly shifted to the relationship between Terry and my wife. 3 weeks later, Terry Ulrich was no longer representing the Gilbert endeavors. Police checked the Schuylkill County bungalow and found it empty. They had no credit card leads, no phone calls, and no idea where I might be. They never questioned Chuck about the cabin. Chuck mentioned that Sarah came to the office several times, trying in vain to find out where I was. She seemed desperate as her source of money dried up. According to Chuck, Terry lost interest in her and blamed her for his problems. I had no plan for the next step. I couldn't go back and had no other options I wanted to explore. At the moment, I was drifting. As we neared the end of the year, I felt myself becoming complacent. I was happy and content with Claire, but I should have paid attention to my real life. It was a cool autumn day, and I was alone in the hut. Something was wrong, but I couldn't figure out what it was. I had just heated up the wood stove and made coffee when the door suddenly swung open. Terry Ulrich was just as big and ugly as the last time I saw him. He stood in the open doorway with a wide smile on his face and an old police SWAT pistol in his right hand. He seemed to stand unsteadily and held his left arm at an odd angle, as if trying to maintain his balance. We just stood and looked at each other. I expected some profound words of revenge, but nothing came. Coffee. Fool. I spent over $10,000 to find you. No, I don't want any damn coffee. Well, what can I do for you? I know it was you, you sneaky little weasel. Your wife told me that you did a lot of target shooting. I hope there is special services here because it will be needed. His face became swollen and red as he spoke. He seemed to be driving himself into some kind of rage. Suddenly, a shocked expression appeared on his face. He dropped the weapon and fell to one knee. Terry Ulrich rolled over on the floor and howled at the top of his lungs. About 12 inches of a crossbow bolt protruded from his left buttock. The remaining 6 inches were buried deep and firmly. Claire just stood in the doorway and smiled. We ran almost all the way back to the Highlands. I didn't take anything with me from the cabin. It took Claire about 15 minutes to load all her belongings into the rented Land Rover. We laughed the whole time like a couple of high school kids. Finally, we calmed down to a fairly normal state. When we reached US 80, breakfast was comforting and filling. I assumed he had already removed the arrow and gone to the hospital. I expressed doubt, suggesting that he should call special services since I had shot him with one of the 3-bladed hunting arrows. I explained that it needed to be cut out and couldn't be pulled out. I predicted that he would likely have to lie on his stomach on a gurney when he goes to the emergency room, which must be awkward. I mentioned the predicament to Miss Claire, stating that it seemed like we were in big trouble now, and I playfully attributed it to her. She flicked a fork full of scrambled eggs and laughed. After breakfast, I called Chuck, and Claire called someone else. I brought him up to speed, and he seemed to find it quite funny. I told him we were going to Ocala, Florida, where my grandparents lived. He chuckled a little, because he knew I only said that to cover his ass. While I was on the phone, Claire came over and took my wallet out of my pocket. She returned to her seat and continued the conversation while I bought treats for our trip. I didn't know where we were going, but I felt like Claire had a plan. She didn't tell me anything, and I didn't ask. I was happy with my ignorance and trusted her. It was a tiring day, and we finally found a great bed and breakfast in the Wisconsin valleys to rest. Exhausted from the road, we quickly fell asleep. The breakfast was fantastic, and 4 hours later, we reached the Duluth Walmart. Claire had her belongings, but I left with nothing. She kept me in the dark about her plans, and it seemed like she was having fun doing so. I got a new set of clothes, and Claire grabbed a big bag of snacks. Since I was a kid, I always dreamed of canoeing on lakes, and now I finally got to do it. Everything was arranged upon our arrival, and the outfitter even took care of Claire's rental car. This hinted that we probably wouldn't be coming back. It was both intriguing and exciting, and I couldn't wait to see what else Claire had in store for me. Before departing, I made a final call to Chuck, and he informed me about Ulrich's latest failure, which had become a significant news story even picked up by national services. June's laughter echoed in the background. Chuck shared that Ulrich's media image was plummeting, and he couldn't seem to do anything right. He expressed his satisfaction, stating that it couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. Chuck also mentioned that Sarah was clueless and broke after the divorce, which apparently hit her hard. I was taken aback and clarified that I didn't consult a lawyer and wasn't aware of any divorce. Chuck insisted, claiming that Sarah was ranting about it that morning and asked me to stop by the cottage to pick up his things and car, since he was in Moss Bluff, Florida, looking for a trailer to rent. Claire waved from the dock as the loaded canoe awaited. Grateful for my Boy Scout camp experience, at least I didn't feel like a complete idiot in the canoe. We spent the next 6 days exploring the lakes, setting up camp each night. Claire, using her cell phone GPS, navigated us seamlessly. I enjoyed the trip, and most notably, the nights filled with starlit closeness. The following day at noon, our adventure continued. A man met us at a remote road pier, hugged Claire, and they spoke in French. About half an hour later, he handed Claire the keys to a truck along with a large envelope. We unloaded the canoe and hit the road. Looking back, I saw him push off from the dock. Driving, Claire rummaged through the envelope, mentioning that I would have to get used to being called Clinton. Really? I gave her a puzzled look. She giggled and handed me a Kennedy-like driver's license with my photo, now labeled Clinton Barfield. I questioned if she was kidding, to which she responded with a firm, "Nope." She informed me that I was now Clinton Barfield and proudly presented my new Canadian passport. She mentioned that we were currently in Canada. 4 days later, we arrived in New Quay. 2 hours after that, we were at Claire's family home near St. Austell. It felt like I was born there. I was comfortable and content. The prospect of meeting Claire's family worried me. The mansion was enormous, and her father invited me to his office. Against the far wall was an elegant walnut weapon cabinet. He reached inside and handed me a rifle, my Marlin 336S with a chamber in it. I realized I was home. I never heard from Sarah or the girls again. Chuck and June received strange Christmas cards every year from Mr. and Mrs. Clinton Barfield. They had no idea. This year, The card will feature a photo of us with our 3 children. I'm sure he'll figure it out.
Ellie Benton always dreamed of a life filled with love, luxury, and deep connections. Growing up in a small southern town, she was enchanted by romantic stories, especially her grandmother's tales of Charleston's charm. After meeting her husband, Will, Ellie felt she was living the life she had always imagined. Marrying Will marked the start of her own romantic journey. They built a comfortable life, traveling together and deepening their bond through shared experiences. Despite appearances, cracks in their marriage were starting to show. One September Friday, a week before their 10th anniversary, Ellie was preparing a special dinner in their coastal cottage. She grilled amberjack with fresh radishes and basil, served with southern grains and homemade bread, and paired it with a 2010 Bordeaux Sauvignon Blanc. She planned to end the night with strawberries and cream after a beach walk with Will. Ellie had discovered, through Will's best friend and business partner Corey Parker, that Will was planning a surprise Caribbean cruise for their anniversary. It included horseback riding on the beach, one of Ellie's favorite activities. Will and Corey met in college at Duke University, where they both studied business and joined the Sigma Chi fraternity. After graduating, they started a technology company that helps high school students choose colleges. The company broke even after 3 years, and by year 12, they each earned $250,000 annually after taxes. They used market research to improve their product and optimize services. Young and ambitious, Will and Corey weren't driven by money, but once they started earning, they agreed it was better to have it. Though not yet wealthy, they were on their way. Their goal was to sell their company to a major tech firm within 3 years, and then tackle a new challenge. Will met Ellie in Charlotte, North Carolina, after starting his company with Corey. Ellie, a Sweetbriar College graduate who specialized in equine studies, dreamed of owning a horse farm. She worked on a farm near Charlotte where she met Will during a team horseback ride. Will, who knew little about horses, fell for Ellie instantly. She found him attractive and charming, and after a few days, Will texted her. They soon went for coffee, and 11 months later, they were married. Their honeymoon in Maroon Bells, Colorado, was a mix of outdoor adventures and relaxing nights at the St. Regis, where Ellie teased Will for his soreness from the activities. Their early sex life was a learning experience, as both were new to exploring their desires together. By the 3rd year of marriage, they had settled into a comfortable routine, with Ellie jokingly calling Will a writer after a rough session. Will, playing along, teased back about taming her, which led to more playful intimacy. Corey, on the other hand, was a womanizer. Ellie introduced him to friends, but after a few short-lived relationships, she kept her distance from his dating life, finding his approach immature. While Will was a bit shorter with white hair and blue eyes, Corey, tall with dark hair and brown eyes, enjoyed the chase, but often lost interest after the first encounter. Ellie regularly scolded him for his behavior. "Corey, you can't just sleep with them and move on," Ellie said, clearly annoyed. "Of course I can, Al," he replied playfully. "I don't promise love and they're all adults. Besides, if I meet someone like you, I might stick around." Turning to Will, Corey added, "Don't drag me into this, brother." Will, reading Ellie's mood, wisely responded, "I may not be pretty, but I'm no fool." A week before their anniversary trip, Ellie prepared a romantic dinner, her passion for horseback riding igniting her sexual energy. She had just returned from riding at Seabrook Island and decided to cook barefoot in a short sundress. As a Mustang pulled up, she felt a rush of excitement. Corey entered, unable to resist her appearance. "No lingerie," he whispered, full of lust. "Damn you, Corey," she said teasingly. "Go shower, dinner's ready in 5 minutes, and later I'll give you the best dessert of your life." 9 months earlier, Corey had started his pursuit of Ellie. He often annoyed her, but saw it as part of the challenge. Despite introducing him to her single friends, Ellie grew frustrated when Corey discarded them after brief flings. For Corey, though, it was all part of his plan. He used these interactions to learn about Ellie through her friends, gathering information to slowly seduce her. Corey didn't intend to harm Will, his longtime friend and business partner. He wasn't trying to outdo him, but saw seducing Ellie as a challenge. He believed he could win her over, enjoy the affair briefly, and then end it, convincing Ellie to stay loyal to Will. His goal was for everyone to come out ahead, with Will never finding out. For years, Corey had pushed Ellie, teasing and apologizing. She often complained about him to Will, but Corey's charm and small, thoughtful gestures eventually softened her. When she hugged him and said, "I still hate your dam in the A, but you can be so sweet," he knew he was back in her good graces. It was the end of January when Corey finally made his breakthrough. Just before Christmas, he had met Ellie's stablemate, Joe, a tall, lively redhead with a wild personality. Their chemistry was undeniable, and they had sex just 30 minutes after their first kiss on New Year's Eve. After leaving the party, they headed to Corey's apartment, where their night of passion continued into the next morning. Though Corey enjoyed being with Joe, his focus remained on Ellie. Joe was just a means to an end. He craved Ellie and knew that with persistence, he could have her. His imagination often wandered to how it would play out. On January 23rd, Corey was at Will and Ellie's house to watch Sunday Night Football. He and Will were in the office drinking beer while Ellie's phone rang during the second quarter of the AFC game. She answered, and they overheard the conversation. "Hey, Joe, what's up?" "No way." "He did not do that, Joe. Calm down and tell me what happened." Suddenly, they heard a loud noise, and Ellie stomped out of the room, furious. "That damn bastard. I'm going to kick his in the A," she shouted before slamming the door. Will gave Corey a knowing look. "Did you break her heart again?" "Sorry, Will," Corey said. "Joe just wasn't for me. I couldn't string her along." "When are you going to grow up? Every time you break up with one of Ellie's friends, she's mad at you, and I'm the one who pays for it. I get no Zex for a week." "Yeah, I know, man. I need to stop messing around before Ellie really liquidates me." "Well, I don't have a Colt, but I can't promise she won't buy one." A few minutes later, Ellie stormed out of the bedroom and confronted Corey. "You're such an a-hole, Parker," she yelled, using his last name, which he knew meant trouble. "Al, I'm sorry. Joe's a great girl, but—" "Shut up, Corey," Ellie screamed, grabbing a pillow and hitting him with it. "You always use them and toss them aside. Why, Corey? What's wrong with you?" Corey tried to avoid her blows by moving around the couch, but the hits, though from a pillow, were strong. He quickly grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. "You're acting crazy, Ellie. I'm sorry I hurt Joe, but I think I should leave. We can talk when you've calmed down." "Calm down?" she shouted, following him. "You sleep with my friends and you think I should calm down?" She threw the pillow as Corey closed the door, narrowly missing him. Still furious, Ellie opened the door again and chased Corey down the sidewalk. Will, deciding not to get involved, remained on the couch, watching football. "I'm not done with you, Corey Parker! Get back here!" Ellie screamed, as she followed him to his car, parked out front and hidden from view by a hedge. They were alone. Corey raised his hands in surrender. "Okay, Al, hold on a minute," he said, softening his tone. "It's 28 degrees, and you're out here barefoot in just a t-shirt. You should go inside before you freeze." Her teeth were chattering, but she wasn't backing down. "To hell with that, Parker." Then she started crying again. "Why, Corey? Why do you treat my girlfriends and every other woman like this? What happened to you?" This was the moment Corey had been waiting for. Putting on his best sympathetic look, he replied, "Do you really want to know, Ellie? Are you sure? Because once I say it, there's no turning back." Ellie was surprised by his sudden vulnerability. She'd always seen him as shallow, but now she glimpsed a deeper side. "Yes, Corey, tell me." "It's you, Ellie. You're the reason I can't stay with anyone. I know you're married, and to my best friend no less. But whenever I'm with someone else, I only see your face. You're the one I want to be with. I'm sorry, but I'm crazy about you." "But Corey, we can't. I mean, I'm flattered, and I care about you too, but we can't. This isn't right." There's a fine line between anger and passion, and Corey knew he was about to cross it with her. He didn't let her finish. Grabbing her with strong hands, he kissed her deeply, one hand on her head and the other around her waist. This was the moment of truth. She would either push him away or respond. At first, she didn't resist, but didn't fully give in either. After a few moments, her weak protests turned into a soft moan, and she kissed him back. Ellie wrapped her arms around his neck, melting into the embrace. Their tongues intertwined, driven by passion, anger, and desire. It lasted over a minute, an intense mix of emotions swirling between them. When they finally broke the kiss, they still held on to each other. "Oh God, what have I done?" Ellie whispered, pulling back slightly. Corey didn't respond. He knew she wasn't asking him. Instead, he kissed her again, his hands now exploring her body. She didn't stop him, pressing closer and reaching below his waist. After a few more heated moments, she pulled away. "Corey, please, I can't do this. Not here. Not now." The fact that she didn't say never was telling. Corey realized he had gotten as far as he could for now. "Ellie, I won't say I'm sorry because I'm not. I don't want to hurt my friend. But that doesn't mean I don't want to be with you. This could be our secret. I'm not the marrying type, and I won't steal you from him. But don't you want to let go and enjoy this? The pleasure it could bring?" "But Will," Ellie started. "We can keep this from him. We both know this won't last forever. Intense things burn out quickly. Maybe a few months, maybe a year. But we'll always have the memories of an incredible connection with each other. He could tell she was starting to waver. I know it would be incredible, Corey, but how can we be sure it won't blow up and ruin my marriage? Will is the person I want to spend my life with. People get caught because they're careless. We're not like that. I'm confident we can do this without anyone getting hurt. No, I don't think so, she said, walking quickly to her car. She was determined not to let it happen, but as Corey watched her leave, he wasn't discouraged. He knew she had crossed a line, and there was no going back. It might take time, but he'd help her take the next steps. After a few moments, he made his way back to the office with Will's coffee, ready to lie about Ellie scolding him. The next steps came sooner than expected. Within a week, Will had to travel to Winston-Salem to meet some technicians they were recruiting. Knowing she'd have the evening to herself, Ellie went horseback riding after work, returning home chilled from the February cold. After a shower, she felt a wave of desire. She wrapped herself in a terry robe and settled by the fireplace with a glass of wine. Will called to check in, saying he'd be home by lunchtime the next day. Ellie teased him as she caressed herself, thinking, I want to make love tonight. No, I want to have sex tonight. 10 minutes later, there was a knock at the back door. Startled, Ellie turned to see Corey Parker standing there, smiling, holding a bottle of 2012 Camus, a 40th anniversary edition wine. Something clicked, and without hesitation, she threw open the door and rushed into his arms, kissing him as if it were the last kiss she'd ever give. There was no one around on that cold February night. Corey put on Will's jacket and cap, just in case anyone saw him, but no one did. He scooped Ellie up, slinging her over his shoulder, and carried her upstairs to the Bentons' marital bed. I didn't plan to take her here, but she's not stopping me, Corey thought as he tossed her onto the bed, making it clear he had come to claim what he wanted. Ellie didn't resist. Corey was in excellent shape, just like Will. Both worked out regularly, but what captivated Ellie wasn't his physique. It was his eyes, burning with raw lust. She met his gaze, filled with the same primal desire. What are you going to do, Parker? You should leave right now. You're not the man for me. You may charm my girlfriends with your eyes, but not me. I'm not impressed. Get out of my bedroom now. Her defiance only fueled him, and he loved it. Which, you know you want it, he growled, grabbing the laces of her robe and untying it. She stood up and started pushing him toward the door, but he quickly grabbed her hands, pinned them above her head, and pressed her against the wall. He kissed her deeply, growling, and they had wild, animalistic sex. Afterward, she ran her hand over his face. You're a bad, bad man, Corey Parker. I can't believe what you did to me. Maybe you should ask me to leave, he replied with a smile. Hell no, she said. I want you to take me in the shower after we rest and clean your dirty little girl. Then we can start again if you think you can handle it. A few minutes later, he obliged. They showered, dried off, and returned to bed. After a couple of hours and another shower, they cuddled and drifted off to sleep. Before Ellie fell asleep, she finally thought of Will. Corey, thinking ahead, set his phone alarm for 6:30 a.m. He let her sleep while he made coffee, considering how careful they'd need to be in the coming months. He started wondering if a short affair would be enough. Ellie was an incredible lover, pushing him in ways no other woman had. He enjoyed her submissiveness, but was equally drawn to her ability to challenge him. Ellie woke to the smell of fresh coffee and saw Corey smiling at her. After heading to the bathroom, they sat quietly, sipping coffee together. Once they finished their cups, they moved to the kitchen for more. But before she could enjoy her coffee, Ellie found herself bent over the kitchen table, experiencing another round of Corey's passion. 2 hours later, the bed linens were washed, and Corey was in the office. Will had just gotten into his car, heading home to his loving wife. Ellie knew Will would want to make love that evening, and in a strange way, she wanted him to. She wanted him to take her back. She knew she would continue her affair with Corey, but somehow convinced herself she could keep them separate and enjoy both. That morning, she and Corey talked about being extra careful. She believed it could work until they tired of the affair and she returned to being a faithful wife. The word betrayal never entered her mind. Like most people, she considered herself a good person. What she was doing didn't seem right, but she refused to see it as truly wrong. I love Will, and I'll never stop, Ellie thought to herself. She didn't dwell on how she could balance love, fidelity, and an affair with her husband's business partner. That's the nature of betrayal. You can't think about it too much. If you do, you start to see the cracks in your reasoning and realize the moral error. So, like many others, Ellie just decided it was fine and kept going. For the next 8 months, she and Corey met at least once a week, sometimes in bed, in the car, on the couch, under the moonlight, in the park, and even in a remote corner of the Lowe's Motor Speedway parking lot. They never met in the same place twice, and always at times when they wouldn't be noticed. Every third meeting, Corey arranged a hotel stay in a nearby town, writing it off as a business expense. Ellie told Will she was checking out horses or researching competing stables. Following Corey's guidance, Ellie continued to love her husband as usual. It wasn't hard for her. She genuinely enjoyed it. Will was too trusting of both of them and never suspected anything. When Will told Corey in August that he was planning a surprise 10th anniversary Caribbean cruise in September, Corey started thinking about arranging one more weekend away with Ellie before then. He knew she was getting nervous about the risks they were taking. As expected, his desire for her hadn't waned, but he was also determined to keep Will from ever finding out. Maybe this would be their last meeting. Back in Charleston, Corey kissed Ellie again before heading to the outdoor shower near the master bedroom, knowing their night would be unforgettable. If either felt even a hint of guilt for their deceit, they didn't mention it. "Dinner can wait a few minutes," she whispered in his ear. Her phone rang, but she ignored it, which turned out to be one of the biggest mistakes of her life. Every cheater slips up eventually. Meanwhile, 3 hours away in Charleston, an unsuspecting Will Benton was enjoying Chinese takeout when his phone rang. The area code was 843. Given his work, Will was familiar with many area codes in the southeastern U.S. Charleston, he thought. He didn't get business calls on his personal phone and couldn't think of any friends from the area. "Hello? Hello, this is Gemma Hartnell. I'm trying to reach Ellie Benton." "Well, you're close. This is her husband, Will. Is there something I can help you with?" "I'm sorry to disturb you, Mr. Benton, but Mrs. Benton was riding with us at Seabrook today, and it seems she dropped her purse. I don't think she's noticed yet, or she would have come back for it. We tried calling her, but she didn't answer. So I found your number in her wallet and thought I'd try reaching you." Will's heart sank as he processed what he heard. "You said Ellie Benton, right?" "Yes, sir." "Can you confirm her address from her driver's license?" "Sure. One moment. 1810 Falling Leaf Drive. That's our address, but there must be some mistake. Ellie's at a horse show in Lexington, Kentucky this weekend." Gemma hesitated, unsure of what she had stumbled into. "I see, sir. If you talk to her, can you let her know her wallet is here at Seabrook Stables?" Yes, of course," Will stammered, trying to understand the situation. "I'll tell her. Thank you." Will hung up and immediately went to his laptop to check the travel itinerary Ellie had given him. She had left early that morning and was supposed to return Sunday evening. At the top of the page, he read, "Champagne Run Jumper Show, Lexington, Kentucky, 9.109.12. This was the weekend, but apparently Ellie wasn't there. What was she doing in Charleston or on Kiowa Island? The question lingered, unanswered. Why would she lie about this? There had to be a reasonable explanation. Will was methodical and forced himself to sit down and consider all the possibilities. Maybe she was planning a surprise for them later in the fall, but that could easily be done online. Perhaps she was preparing something special for their anniversary, though he had already hinted about his own surprise. Could there be another horse show in Charleston this weekend? Had she changed her plans at the last minute to avoid seeming frivolous? He quickly searched the Charleston Visitors website for anything related to horses. Nothing. Maybe she was with her sorority sisters and hadn't wanted to mention it? None of these thoughts made sense. Then, reluctantly, he wrote down the last thing he didn't want to consider but couldn't ignore. Is she cheating? He felt a lump in his throat and a knot in his stomach. There were no other reasonable explanations. He thought he had married the most amazing woman. Beautiful, intelligent, and gifted. A woman he planned to spend his life with. A faithful woman. What should he do? He needed to think and process, but he also needed to calm down. He needed to ground himself. So he turned to the one person he thought could help. Corey. He began to press the speed dial for button 2 when he suddenly stopped. Oh crap, he thought as he started putting together the pieces he desperately hoped weren't true. Corey went to Florida to visit his parents this weekend, right? He scrolled through his contacts until he found Marty Parker's number and pressed call. Will, what an honor. I hope you and my son are still conquering the world. Hey Marty, I'm trying to reach Corey. His cell isn't answering, he lied. But he mentioned he'd be with you and Vera this weekend. It's not urgent, just a question. Is he nearby? I think you're mistaken, Will, Marty replied. Corey said he'd be in Hilton Head with a couple of fraternity brothers this weekend. Want me to try to reach him? Will fought to keep his composure. Don't worry, Marty. I probably mixed up the weekends. I left him a message. He'll likely call back. Hello, Vera, he barely managed to say before hanging up. This can't be happening, Will desperately tried to reason. Not his best friend and his wife. Please don't let this be true. He sat there for over an hour, struggling to breathe normally and think clearly. What should he do? Get on a plane and search for them? This is insane. He had no idea where they might be staying together. Should he ignore it until Sunday evening and ask for an explanation when Ellie returns? That wouldn't work because if she lied, she would just cover her tracks. He was sure she would probably have the Lexington hotel bill to back up her story. Ellie wasn't foolish. An hour later, he was still no closer to a decision, so he Googled divorce laws in North Carolina. North Carolina was a no-fault divorce state, and since they had no children, child support was off the table. However, alimony was another concern. Would she want half of his share of the company? If so, she and Corey would hold the majority and could oust him. Was this their plan all along? He kept reading and noticed, in bold print under Chapter 50 of the law, the grounds for divorce. 2 words, commits adultery. But a significant amount of evidence was required. If she was cheating on him with Corey, all he had was a phone call from a stable employee. One thing became clear. If Ellie and Corey were involved, he was doomed. He could have walked away from the money. It wasn't that important to him. He was skilled and had helped build a successful company. He could easily find a high-paying job elsewhere or even start his own business. But Will also knew he couldn't pretend to be a loving husband for months while a private investigator uncovered the truth. It was late Friday night when he finally admitted he was just going in circles with his thoughts. He took 3 Tylenol PM tablets, set his alarm for 8 a.m., and went to bed. After 30 minutes of tears, the medication began to kick in. Meanwhile, in Charleston, it was past midnight when Corey and Ellie sat on the screened-in porch after a wonderful dinner, a moonlit walk on the beach, and 2 hours of passionate sex. The first hour had been rough, as if both partners needed to dominate one another. After their walk, Ellie ran a bath in a deep vintage clawfoot tub and told Corey to wait for her in the king-sized 4-poster bed. "No more waiting, witch," he growled, heading straight for the tub. Ellie would never let Will treat her like that, but Corey's relentless desire excited her. She loved when he took control and that he wanted her more than anyone else. Knowing he had other women only added to her twisted pride. Moments later, they moved to the bedroom. 15 minutes later, they were back on the porch, quietly talking in the afterglow. Ellie wore very short shorts and a t-shirt that barely covered her, while Corey sat beside her in loose Nike shorts. Her legs rested on his lap as he massaged her feet and calves. "What are we doing, Corey?" "What do you mean, baby?" "I think you know exactly what we did," she snapped. "Don't be smart," he replied, playfully hitting her shoulder. "Why are we doing this? We've been together for over 8 months. You have more girls than you want, and I have a husband whom I love." The last words caught in her throat. She truly felt a deep love for her husband, but how could she express that with a straight face, given where she was and what she was doing? Corey knew better than to tease her about her feelings for Will. In truth, he also felt a twinge of guilt whenever she mentioned his name. He had known Will for nearly 7 years longer than she had. They spent 8 to 10 hours every day in each other's offices, planning, revising, pushing, creating, and developing. With no siblings of his own, Will was like a brother to Corey. "I don't know, Ellie, I just can't keep my mind or hands off you. I love Will too, but you intrigue me and I have to have you." "Maybe you just can't accept that Will has something you don't," Ellie mused. "Maybe we enjoy this weekend and then Will and I leave for a cruise on Tuesday. He must never suspect anything." "You drive me crazy and I love Zex," Corey replied. "But I want to live with Will as my husband and hopefully the father of our children soon." "I hope you're not suggesting this weekend will be our last," Corey challenged. "I'm not sure, but no," she admitted. "I don't think I can give up your incredible sexual skills overnight." "Don't get cocky, stud," she teased. "But you always make me see stars when we have Zex," she conceded. "It's too late to tell me not to be arrogant," Corey said, standing up and picking her up to carry her to bed. Maybe this wouldn't be their last encounter, he thought for a moment before they indulged in each other again. At 8 a.m. sharp, Will Benton woke up, groggy from too many sleeping pills. He took a cold shower to clear his mind and brewed a pot of coffee. The next half hour was spent finalizing a plan he had been developing. 5 minutes later, he was dialing the after-hours number for Sterling Private Investigators in Charleston, South Carolina. The operator took his information and promised that one of their highly trained professionals would return his call within 30 minutes. Private investigators earn their keep by what they uncover, so the return call came in under 10 minutes. "Mr. Benton, this is Amanda Cunningham. How can I assist you?" Will explained everything. His wife, Ellie Benton, claimed she was going to Lexington for the weekend, but somehow she had dropped her wallet at the stables on Kiowa Island. He suspected she was with her lover, his business partner, Corey Parker. He had no idea where they were staying, but assumed it was a private house or cottage, secluded enough for discretion. They would likely be there until tomorrow, so time was of the essence. He needed undeniable evidence. Photos, videos, audio recordings, anything. Money wasn't an issue. Amanda chuckled silently at that last point. "Don't worry, Mr. Benton. Once we receive your 50% deposit, our team will locate them if they're here and find out exactly what they're doing. We don't call ourselves highly trained professionals just for fun. Our small firm of 5 has over 30 years of combined experience in surveillance, espionage, and covert operations. I'll know their whereabouts within the hour." They spent another 15 minutes discussing the details. Will wanted a bit more information before sending the $6,000 deposit. Amanda's responses were clear and convincing. Will received the transfer details, made the electronic payment, and they agreed she would call him by noon with an update. At the same time, Ellie checked her voicemails from the previous night. She realized she had forgotten to call Will to check on him. She did so from the Mustang as Corey drove them back to Kiowa to retrieve her wallet. The call went straight to voicemail, so she left Will a sweet, loving, yet completely misleading message about the horses and the terrible breakfast at the North Lexington Courtyard Marriott. She assured him she was looking forward to their 10th anniversary celebration next week. When they arrived at Seabrook, Ellie hurried into the office to get her wallet. Since Gemma wasn't working that morning, she didn't know about the call Gemma had made to Will the day before. Ellie and Corey decided to shop on King Street and grab lunch at slightly north of Broad. Meanwhile, Will gave Amanda and her team some time to work and contacted Ed Simmons, a longtime family friend and a sharp lawyer. Ed was preparing for a round of golf at Cedarwood Country Club when the call came in. He decided to answer, apologizing to his partners, giving his caddy a generous tip, and heading straight to Will's place. Ed and Will spent the next 90 minutes discussing the details and planning the best course of action. Ed quickly concluded that Ellie was likely cheating, with Corey being the other party involved. Will's phone rang at 11:57 a.m. Amanda was on the line. "Ellie is definitely in town," Amanda reported. "She went to Seabrook yesterday and was back this morning with a man in a red Mustang convertible to pick up her wallet. The man matches Corey Parker's description. The car was rented from National Car Rental under Mr. Parker's name, with an address listed for a cottage on the northern end of Folly Island, secluded and private." She paused before adding, "They're currently downtown shopping on King Street and just sat down for lunch at Snob. It looks like shrimp and grits, but I can't confirm." Will was shocked by the speed and accuracy of the information. "How the hell did you figure all this out so quickly?" he asked. Before Amanda could answer, Ed interrupted. "Mrs. Cunningham, this is Ed Simmons, Mr. Benton's lawyer. Would you mind if we recorded this conversation?" "Sure," Amanda replied, "but please call me Amanda." "Thank you, Amanda," Ed continued. "We're officially hiring you on behalf of Mr. Benton. Please send all future invoices to my email. Also, could you confirm the receipt of my client's payment?" "Yes," Amanda said. "One of my assistants is already verifying the transaction. We'll proceed immediately with surveillance and evidence gathering. You'll receive an update by noon tomorrow." Amanda and Ed spent another 15 minutes outlining a plan for further action. Will listened closely, impressed by how well they collaborated. Amanda suggested ideas that Ed accepted, leading them to a solid plan. "Thank you, Amanda," Ed concluded. "You have a lot to accomplish in a short time, so I'll let you get back to work." "Got it," Amanda replied before hanging up. Turning to Will, Ed became serious. "Will, I need to know your ultimate goal here. Do you want to try to salvage the relationship, or are you considering divorce? I hate to put you on the spot, but I need to know the direction we're heading." Will sat in silence for a moment. He wasn't impulsive, but the reality of his situation hit him hard. "I loved her with all my heart, Ed. I trusted her and she betrayed me. My best friend did the same." He shook his head, fighting back tears. "This isn't just a mistake. This is deliberate betrayal, and I can't stand for it. I want them both out of my life, no matter what it costs. I want them to feel the pain I'm feeling right now." Ed reached out and squeezed Will's shoulder. "All right, let's get to work." By Sunday afternoon, Ellie was becoming anxious. She had called Will 5 times, 3 times on Saturday and twice on Sunday morning, but all she got was a polite but brief text. Busy with the crisis. We'll talk Sunday evening. Enjoy Lexington. She showed the message to Corey and asked him to call Will to find out what was going on. He couldn't know, could he? She asked, panic creeping into her voice. How can I call him, Ellie? Corey responded. He didn't mention any issues at the office. What am I supposed to say? Hey, Will, Ellie and I are in Charleston having Zex, but she thinks there's a business problem, so I'm checking in. Ellie bit her lip. Damn, you're right. I'm not thinking straight. It must be work-related. There's no way he could know. I told him I was visiting my parents this weekend. Maybe he's just trying not to bother me. Yeah, that's probably it, Corey replied, though his voice lacked certainty. Later, they showered together before heading to the airport, but Ellie's thoughts drifted back to Charlotte. Sensing her distraction, Corey didn't push for more intimacy. He smiled to himself, thinking, lots of Zex when we get back and it'll all be fine. Just 3 minutes after they left the cottage, an AT&T van pulled up. 2 workers entered to set up and install surveillance equipment. 30 minutes later, Amanda and her team began reviewing the footage. One of her assistants commented, Damn, they have stamina. Corey dropped Ellie off at the terminal and went to return the rental car. As he did, his father called. What's up, Dad? He asked. Hey, son, just wanted to check in. I hope you're enjoying Hilton Head. Yeah, I'm not a great player, but we played a lot of golf and enjoyed some excellent seafood. Are you and Mom doing okay, Wing? Yes, we're fine. Listen, son, I won't keep you, but Will called me on Friday night looking for you. He thought you were visiting us this weekend. I reminded him you were in Hilton Head, which surprised me because he doesn't usually make mistakes like that. Is everything all right with him? Corey felt a lump in his throat, but tried to sound casual. He's got a lot on his mind right now, Dad. I think he and Ellie want to start a family, and he's a little anxious about being a dad. I'm sure he just mixed up the dates. I still plan to come back in 3 weeks for the weekend. His father seemed satisfied with his response. They chatted a bit more before saying goodbye. Corey decided not to mention this to Ellie. It's probably nothing, and I don't want to stress her out before her flight home. They flew separately just to be safe, and their flights arrived on time. Since Ellie only had a carry-on, she headed straight to her car in the long-term parking lot and drove home. Although she was still nervous, she gradually calmed down and gathered her thoughts during the drive. Traffic was light on Sunday evening, allowing her to reach home quickly. She couldn't wait to see Will and make sure her deception hadn't been discovered. She needed to play the role of a tired wife after a long weekend, but her excitement to see her husband made her want to shower and make love to him. As it turned out, she didn't need to pretend, nor did she get the chance. When she arrived at the house and pressed the garage door remote, she received her first indication that something was wrong. The remote didn't work. Damn batteries, she thought. Then she noticed the house was dark, with only the porch light on. She walked up to the front door with her rolling suitcase. As she got closer, she spotted an envelope taped to the door with her name typed on it. She tucked it under her arm and tried to unlock the door. After several attempts, the key wouldn't fit. She started trembling, dropped her bag, and sat down in one of the Adirondack chairs on the porch. She ripped open the envelope and soon burst into tears. Mrs. Benton, this letter informs you that your husband, Will Benton, has retained me as his attorney. My client has learned that you are engaged in an adulterous and illicit sexual relationship with his business partner, Corey Parker. He knows you have not been to Lexington, Kentucky in recent days, but have in fact been in Charleston, South Carolina, with Mr. Parker. You should contact Mr. Benton through my office. He will provide evidence of his knowledge regarding your betrayal and your marriage to Mr. Parker. Mr. Benton has changed the locks on his house and asked that you find another place to live soon. As you recall, the mortgage is solely in his name, so you have no legal right to enter without his permission. Please do not try to contact my client. He will reach out to you through my office within the week for an initial discussion about separation and divorce. Mr. Benton will allow you to enter the house under supervision to collect your personal belongings tomorrow morning. Again, please communicate with me, not Mr. Benton, to arrange this. I strongly recommend that you seek legal counsel. When you do, please provide them with my name and contact information. Mr. Benton has assured me that there are sufficient funds in your joint account to cover immediate expenses, such as accommodation. If necessary, please use your Bank of America debit card, as all co-branded credit cards have been paid off and canceled. He suggested that it may be in your best interest to ask Mr. Parker if you could stay with him. Sincerely, Edward M. Simmons, attorney, Simmons and Wyckoff. It took Ellie a few minutes to regain her composure. She began trying to call Will, ignoring or forgetting the instructions she had just read. 5 minutes later, she received a text message from Ed Simmons. Mrs. Benton, I urge you to respect my client's wishes and not attempt to contact him directly. Ellie stared at the message on her screen. Across town, Corey Parker arrived at his condominium, where he also received a letter from Simmons and Wyckoff. To Mr. Corey Parker, from Edward Simmons, attorney Simmons and Wyckoff, my client, your business partner, Mr. William J. Benton, has learned that you are engaged in illicit sexual relations with his wife, which constitutes adultery. An initial financial audit conducted by Randolph Michaels, CPA, has revealed that company funds were used to cover at least 8 meetings between you and Mrs. Eleanor Benton in violation of the law. To avoid both criminal and civil prosecution, my client, Mr. Benton, wishes to negotiate the dissolution of the partnership and the purchase of your 50% stake in the company. It is advisable that you seek legal and financial counsel regarding this matter. Please do not contact my client directly. Direct all communications to me at my email, edSW.com. Any violation of this request will lead to immediate legal action against you. Corey cursed himself. Damn, how many times have I taken Ellie with me and labeled it as entertainment expenses for clients? He realized he had already electronically submitted about $1,000 from last weekend to the accountant for reimbursement. He knew Will rarely scrutinized expenses closely, and Diana, the accountant, had no reason to suspect anything amiss. The annual independent audit was completed 2 weeks ago, with no discrepancies found. The total amount couldn't be more than a few $1,000s. But there's definitely something here that a snake like Michaels could have uncovered. He spent the rest of the night drinking, trying to figure out how to establish a perimeter defense. He found it easier to drink bourbon than to plan his next steps. Ellie had called and texted him more than a dozen times that evening, but he ignored every message. Damn it, I have a huge problem. Handle your issues and leave me alone, he thought, frustrated by the situation. How quickly the shaky foundation of a relationship built on lust can crumble. Ellie sat on her porch, dazed and in shock. Somehow her husband had learned much more than she ever gave him credit for. Her lover, whom she now reluctantly referred to as such, was ignoring her calls and messages. I see where I stand with him now, she muttered under her breath. Bastard. If Ellie had ever truly considered it, she would have realized that while Corey might be good at business and a solid friend during easy times, he was never the type to put himself in jeopardy for her. Tears began streaming down her cheeks again. I betrayed the man who would die for me, for a bastard who doesn't care about me, she whispered to herself, filled with regret. Meanwhile, in the guest cottage by the heated pool at Ed Simmons' house, Will and Ed were finalizing their plans. Will knew he had made the right choice in hiring Ed Simmons. On Sunday evening, Ed gathered another senior partner, 2 junior associates, and a counterpart to discuss strategy. Will couldn't shake the thought. This is going to cost me a fortune. Yet he smiled. Better to spend money this way than to lose it all to a cheating wife. Ed reassured Will that both Ellie and Corey would soon realize the seriousness of the situation and would likely hire their own lawyers. Their first responses will be denials, easily countered by our evidence, or attempts to save face, Ed explained. He encouraged Will to stick to his regular routine and be patient. I doubt we'll have any updates until midweek, Ed advised. So go to work, keep a low profile, avoid strangers, and don't take candy from anyone in a suspicious van. He laughed, hugging Will tightly. Don't worry, son. You're in good hands with Simmons, and Wyckoff. Will hesitated to go home, fearing Ellie might be waiting on his porch with her usual excuses. It's not what it seems. It didn't mean anything. Scenarios played in his head, but Ed was one step ahead. After a brief call, Ed turned to Will with a grin. One of my guys just drove by your house and told her to leave because she was trespassing. Will raised his eyebrows. She tried to act indignant, saying she was waiting for her husband, but my guy suggested she could enter if it was her house. That's when she got furious. Ed chuckled. He pretended to call the police loud enough for her to hear. She left quickly after that. Will smiled at the thought, though it was a sad one. Stupid witch, he muttered. In the following days, Will followed his lawyer's advice closely. By Tuesday, he changed his phone number because Ellie couldn't grasp that he didn't want to talk to her anymore. The office atmosphere was tense. Corey avoided Will, working from home on his lawyer's advice. You don't want to appear pushy, was the guidance. We'll value honesty, he told the small group, mentioning a disagreement he and Corey were resolving. He assured everyone that the issues would be temporary, though whether he believed that was questionable. Ellie continued working at the stables, but was so distracted that her employer asked if something was wrong. She explained that she and Will were having issues. Without going into detail, her boss, Stephanie, hugged her and encouraged her to hang in there. Ellie struggled to find competent legal representation. Lawyers wanted the facts up front, and it was clear there was little chance of a significant payout. The first two lawyers dropped her case. Eventually, she turned to a personal injury lawyer named Seth Moore, who assured her he had handled tougher cases and could secure a substantial settlement. He hoped she would have enough to cover his fees and maybe some left over for a night out at his favorite nightclub. Neither Seth nor Corey's lawyer, James Abernathy, had much time. Ed Simmons, a respected trial lawyer, pushed for a quick hearing after Ellie was served a summons 2 days after returning home. Abernathy knew he wasn't holding a winning hand, and that dragging the case out was beyond his client's finances. By the end of the second week, he advised Corey to offer to sell his share of the business at a reduced price to give him time to recover and pay his legal fees. Corey authorized an offer of $0.80 on the dollar. Simmons received this and suggested Will counter with 10 cents on the dollar. "We'll probably end up around 30, he said. Abernathy knows the situation but will still negotiate hard. Will wanted Corey to feel the pain. 10 cents on the dollar would bring him back to his financial starting point. But Will knew he needed to heed his lawyer. Getting 30 cents on the dollar would put Corey in a tough spot. He'd leave the rest to fate or a later time. 3 days later, Ed conveyed the deal to Will. 28 cents on the dollar, he said over the phone. Not as much as you hoped, but still a solid win. Will thanked him. Ed then addressed a key issue. Will, you need to talk to Ellie. The judge will want to know you tried to communicate with her. Even if divorce is your goal, having answers before the judge asks is always better. We had Judge Kim Landy on our divorce case. It could be better or worse, but it's manageable. She has strict rules about resolution, so she'll want to know about counseling, possibly even requesting it. I won't bore you with details, but it's time to talk. I'll arrange everything. We'll start with the lawyers, but then it's wise to meet alone. Show you can have a calm conversation, even in pain. It helps our case and shows you're reasonable. Will lowered his head, knowing Ed was right, but dreading it. Okay, Ed, you're right. Arrange the meeting. Ed looked at his young client with sympathy, recalling his own heartbreak. He had paid for college with an NROC scholarship and served as a first lieutenant during the First Gulf War. Back home, his love, Becky, decided not to wait for him. Ed was devastated, but he moved on with support from friends and family. He believed Will would be okay eventually, and that he would be better off without his cheating wife. But now wasn't the time to share that. Ed needed to be there for him. He might be tough, but he had a big heart. The meeting was set for noon the following Friday. Ed wanted Will to have the weekend to recover from the tough days ahead. Both sides agreed to spend the first 30 minutes with their lawyers, then have private time for Will and Ellie. Ellie and Seth arrived on time, with Seth in an off-the-rack suit from JCPenney. Ellie wore a modest light blue dress, a burgundy sweater, and her hair in a ponytail with Michael Kors glasses. Ed and Will stood as they entered the private conference room at Simmons, and Wickoff, ensuring the other party had to walk through several lobbies. Ed wanted more to understand what he was up against. He knew Seth's office was cramped, with 3 chairs at a desk from IKEA owned by his assistant, part-time dancer Molly. Will had always been drawn to Ellie, and seeing her now brought a lump to his throat. Despite her betrayal, she still seemed beautiful to him. He managed a polite smile, but avoided any affectionate gaze. "It's good to see you, Will," she said, studying him closely, perhaps trying to sense any lingering feelings. Will nodded. "Ellie, thanks for coming." Ed maintained his poker face, but thought, "Good job, guy. Don't show her anything." "Shall we begin?" he asked, gesturing to the chairs. "Yes, thank you," Seth responded quickly, likely eager to gain an advantage. "My client agreed to this meeting to understand what her husband is proposing to save their marriage," Seth declared, trying to sound assertive. Ed interrupted, pulling a 6-inch folder from the end of his desk and sliding it across the table toward Seth. "What's this?" Seth asked, eyeing the folder suspiciously. "I'm not sure we're ready to accept any documents today," he added, his uncertainty evident. Ed leaned forward. "This is about 50% of our evidence. It demonstrates your client's adultery and betrayal of her marriage vows." He pointed to the folder. "We've omitted unnecessary details to avoid repetition. Inside, you'll find recordings and photographs of your client's sexual encounters with Mr. Corey Parker in Charleston, South Carolina 3 weeks ago. We also have testimonies from hotel staff who saw your client register under false names as husband and wife with Mr. Parker. These meetings occurred over 6 months, and our investigation provides only verifiable facts." Seth turned pale while Ellie's reaction was more intense. She tensed, realizing the extent of the evidence against her. She winced, picturing people seeing photos of her private moments that had once felt thrilling but now seemed cheap and shameful. Without missing a beat, Ed slid a second thinner folder across the table. "This is my client's proposal for a divorce settlement." He looked at Ellie. "Personally, I think the terms are quite generous. If it were up to me, I'd take this directly to the judge and show her the extent of your betrayal, Mrs. Benton. However, Will, being the honorable man he is, insisted I present this offer first." Ellie appeared defeated, and Seth, clearly outmatched, shuffled in his seat. Ed knew they wouldn't reach an agreement today, but with the initial hearing just 2 weeks away, there would be room for bargaining. Will's offer was tough, but fair. A lump sum payment of $75,000 if Ellie agreed to relinquish her stake in the business. She would waive all future claims and split the proceeds from the house sale. Ellie could keep her car, but would start paying for its upkeep a month after the divorce. She could take any furniture except the wedding bed and a set of antique rocking chairs from Will's grandmother. She could also keep her jewelry, except for the engagement and wedding rings, which were to be returned upon finalizing the divorce. Lastly, she had to acknowledge that her adultery was the reason for the divorce. Seth, trying to sound assertive, replied, "My client and I will review this offer and provide a counter by early next week. However, Mrs. Benton will not agree to her husband's demand for the return of the rings." Ed remained calm, though his anger was evident. He leaned in, voice steely. "Seth, we both know your client has repeatedly violated her marriage vows with full awareness of the harm she caused my client. If you want to play this out in front of Judge Landy, go ahead. I'd welcome the chance to see you squirm in her courtroom." Seth fell silent, his bravado fading. Ed continued, "But let me be clear. If you push for more, we will make all this public at trial. You have until Tuesday afternoon to respond. After that, this offer is off the table and we'll see you in court." Seth hesitated, but even he knew Ed held all the cards. The settlement, while harsh, was also a lifeline for Seth. He stood to make $10,000 from the case, more than he typically earned in 2 months. The tension was thick, but the meeting was effectively over. Ed stood and buttoned his jacket. "Let's give the Bentons some time to talk privately." Seth stood and shook hands with Ed, offering the obligatory, "We'll be in touch." After the lawyers left, an awkward silence filled the room. Will looked at Ellie, waiting for her to speak. As the aggrieved party, he recalled Ed advising him not to speak first. Ellie stared at the floor, nervously twisting her fingers in her lap. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft and trembling. "I have no excuses, Will. If I could take it all back, I would. My actions have hurt you deeply, and I'll carry that guilt for the rest of my life. Saying I'm sorry or that it was just Zex would be disrespectful, but I need you to know how deeply I regret it." Will's expression remained cold. "Believe what you want, Ellie. It doesn't matter to me anymore." Her eyes filled with desperation. "Is there any hope for us, Will? Could we get through this with counseling? I don't want a divorce. I never did. I'll do anything. Just please. Let's stay together." Will clenched his jaw, fighting to contain his anger. How could she ask this of him now, after everything? Taking a deep breath, he forced himself to stay calm. "If the court requires counseling, I'll go." Ellie's eyes briefly flickered with hope, but Will crushed it. "But know this. I don't want to be with you, ever again. I loved you and gave you everything, my heart, mind, and soul, and you repaid me by sleeping with my best friend. I don't even know who you are anymore, Ellie, other than a cheap woman. I'll never touch you again or have children with you. You want forgiveness? You lost that the moment you slept with Corey?" Ellie paled, shaken by his words. "Will, do you really hate me that much?" He didn't hesitate. "Yes, Ellie, today I do." His voice was cold, heavy with finality. "You've only ever thought of yourself. I want to feel nothing for you. You're not worth the pain anymore." Ellie sat in stunned silence, realizing her last attempts had failed. She tried a few more times, offering promises of Zex, swearing off Corey, even suggesting therapy to understand her choices. But Will had shut down. Nothing she said reached him. After half an hour, the conversation ended. As Ellie stood to leave, she turned to him one last time. "Will you walk me to the car? Just one last moment together?" Will shook his head. "Go on your own, Ellie. Or better yet, call Corey and have him pick you up. Crawl back into bed with him for all I care. We're done." He walked away but paused at the door, turning to her with a bitter smile. "We had everything, Ellie, and you threw it away. But I'll give Corey credit. He must be one hell of a lover." Over the next few days, Seth Moore, the lawyer, struggled to get Simmons to concede points in the divorce suit. After the second conversation, Simmons stopped returning his calls. With the Tuesday deadline approaching, Ellie realized she had little chance of getting more than what Will offered. Corey finally called her on Monday, suggesting they meet for comfort. Desperate for affection, Ellie agreed to meet him at his condominium. She arrived at 8 p.m. and stayed the night, having sex several times. Corey treated her like a plaything, and she accepted it. It was pathetic, but it was her choice. Meanwhile, Simmons had an investigator outside Corey's place, recording her comings and goings. When she left in the morning, it was clear she had been taken advantage of. Her mascara and lipstick smudged, looking cheap and used. The investigator chuckled and passed the evidence to Simmons, and Wyckoff. Later that morning, as Ed reviewed the file with an assistant, he muttered, "Nobody could be that stupid." When Ellie returned to her studio apartment, she called Moore and told him to accept the divorce petition without modifications. He tried to argue, but she hung up. The day of the first hearing arrived, and Judge Landis was as strict as everyone had said. She examined both sides, asking leading questions. Moore looked like a man in a sinking raft with sharks circling him. Despair was the only fitting word for his case. Simmons was under scrutiny, too, but he was impeccably prepared, providing answers before being asked and presenting ample evidence. Judge Landis asked the couple several questions. Will was well prepared, while Ellie was not. At the end of the hearing, Judge Landis stated, "The evidence in this case is overwhelming. While every difficult marriage has two sides, Mrs. Benton, I see no good reason for your decision to leave your husband for Mr. Parker. As I understand it, he even sold his share of the business for almost nothing, which confirms my view. I usually recommend counseling, but your cruel betrayal makes reconciliation impossible. I urge you to carefully reconsider your choices and focus on living your best life on your own. Mr. Benton's divorce claim and its terms are granted. The marriage is dissolved. Court is adjourned." There were no celebratory hugs or applause from Will. He and Ed discreetly shook hands. Seth Moore quickly retreated, leaving Ellie at the table. She stood up and exited the courtroom completely alone. Will began his new life, alone and in pain, but knowing he wasn't broken. 5 months after finalizing his divorce, Corey left his condominium and apparently slipped, falling down 3 flights of stairs. He spent 3 weeks in the hospital afterward with a blood alcohol level of 0.15, nearly double the legal limit. He didn't remember the fall. His insurance expired while he was job hunting, and his hospital bills drained his savings. Will learned about the incident during a trip to Smoky Mountain National Park and smiled to himself, thinking couldn't happen to a better guy. The police investigated and found that Corey had a visitor that evening, Ms. Ellie Shriver. Detectives uncovered clear evidence that they were lovers, but it also turned out Corey had another relationship on the side. Ellie was convicted of felony attack and sentenced to 3 years in prison. It was a harsh experience. To this day, Corey walks with a noticeable limp and works in technical support for a local college.